Good afternoon. I'm going to consider this the coziest private screening ever, made and tailored just for y'all. And just as context setting for the film, really quickly, there are three things that this movie does for me and hopefully will do for you. We want for it to kind of lay bare some of the inequities that create urban poverty in our country. We secondly want to center on the human condition of people experiencing poverty in our country. And then hopefully by the end of the film, you're going to get fired up to figure out what we can do as institutions and individuals to help people galvanize out of it. That might be my 12th or so time seeing the film. And I notice something new every time. Today, I noticed that Elisa, when she's coming down the escalator in the killer airport scene, her toenail polish is different colors. So that's what I noticed today. But so thanks. We're going to do just a little level-setting chat with the directors to get a sense of the inspiration behind the film and the way in which they seek to use it as a tool for this larger conversation around inclusive employment. So maybe to Greg, I might start and say, hey, how did you come up with the idea to tell this story? Why did you do it? You know, what was your motivation there?
We really, what we wanted to do was make a movie about toenail polish, and that was really the first inspiration. So we always like to say that sometimes we find our documentary subjects and sometimes they find us, and this was definitely one that found us. A friend of ours who became the co-producer, Amy Ostrander, was having I think at like a dinner party or something with somebody who was an acquaintance of hers, and they were talking. And he said he'd been involved with this amazing organization for years, and he always thought it would make a great documentary. And so he was talking about Kara, and she said, well, I just happen to know these two guys who do that, so maybe you want to talk to them. So Amy introduced us to Mark Carroll, and Mark then introduced us to Kara, and we started to explore Kara as a possible site for a documentary. And anybody who comes to Kara for the first time goes to Motivations, which is the morning, every morning ritual that Kara does, where the entire community is sort of in the conference room that you saw in the film, and they gather in concentric circles on chairs, and they make announcements, and then they have kind of a theme, and people talk about very personal, very intimate things in their lives that are related to that theme, and then they have to do the most terrifying thing in the world, which is start to sing. And it's like a musical trust fall where they start to sing, and then the entire community kind of swoops in behind them and picks up the song and continues. And all you have to do is be there once, and you're so moved. It's terrifying, but it's also completely inspiring. And we were pretty much sold after that first visit. And of course, the connection to today is that Mark Carroll, who was the one who introduced us to Kara, had gotten involved as an executive on loan from Goldman Sachs, and he had started the social enterprise that you see in the film, Clean Slate. So if it weren't for social enterprise, the film wouldn't have been made. So
that's a great
yes,
context setting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for you, John, I guess to get up in there, right, to get into the annals of the halls of Kara and into people's personal lives, and for them to tell their story in the way that they told it requires a lot of trust. And so for you, how did you all think about developing trust with the participants and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, that really is kind of the key for what we do is building that trust to be able to have moments like we did with Clarence and Kristen and Elisa and Tamala. And so we spent a whole month prior to the group that you saw just observing another cohort going through the process with Jesse, just trying to figure out how do we fit into this environment, how do we bring our cameras, our sound equipment, ourselves into this environment in a way that wouldn't affect Jesse's work, wouldn't affect the students' experience of it. So that month was invaluable in just figuring out how we do that, and then building the trust with the cohort that we were with. It was just a lot of time getting to know them, meeting their families. Just again, it's time, and it's, we sometimes refer to it as kind of wasted time because it doesn't necessarily make it in the film, but it's totally invaluable because it just builds that trust. And so that was the key.
Yeah, there was one moment where we kind of, because you're always nervous because it is such an odd circumstance. So about a week and a half into transformations, George, who was kind of the the designated leader of the cohort, I forget, the poet laureate of the cohort, basically. He came up to us at a break and he said, "I just want to let you guys know on behalf of the whole class, I just want to say thank you for coming with us on this journey. It really means a lot to us." So sort of the recognition that by being there and spending the time and committing ourselves to it, it in a sense kind of dignified the stories that they had. And I think they saw that as a valuable thing. And so once George kind of gave it the stamp of approval, it was like, okay, we can relax a little bit and we're okay.
You felt like you were on your way.
Yes, exactly.
So there were often times during the creation of this film that these two guys would say to me, actually in the editing process, they'd say something like, well, we had to cut this scene out because we could actually hear ourselves boo-hooing in the background. They were in the audio files themselves. And so that's a segue for me to talk about the fact that the employment social enterprise is kind of at the core of this film. You think that this place is supposed to be about getting people back to work, but we're talking about a lot of warm, fuzzy, and all kinds of other things that have, quote, nothing to do with work through this program. So why? Why is that an ingredient of the work in your mind?
I mean, it's such a strange thing. To me, the emblematic scene is the love exercise of that. Here you are in week 1 or 2 of a job training program, and Jesse is talking about love. And it's sort of like, why in the world would love be a relevant topic for, just give me a job, that's all I need. But I think what Kara is all about is, there's there are the skills, the job skills that we sort of know and kind of think about when we think of job training. And then there are, what people typically refer to as the soft skills, but Kara calls the harder skills, which are communication and conflict resolution and expressing love and receiving it in return. And I think the process of transformations is all about starting to believe that you can trust and acknowledge and recognize that there are people around you who you can use as resources that you can trust and who may just have a connection to you that is a connection of a loving connection, so that they will be there for you when things inevitably go bad again. And that without that, without those extra harder skills and without that awareness, you're kind of on your own. And when the storm comes, you're at a loss again, and you find yourself back at the bottom. So I think that's the incredibly powerful thing about being at Kara is seeing all these things that are very specific to the students and their circumstances, but also all these things that are completely universal for all of us. The things that we really, really need to not just live a meaningful life, but also sustain our capacity to work. And I think that's what makes it such an amazing place.
1,000%. On that last point, just the connective tissue between the film and the topic that we're exploring today, it's about getting people back to employment, right? But we want that employment to be sticky. And when life kind of rears its ugly head again, that's part of the reason why organizations like this reflect on these harder skills, because those are the skills that keep you going and keep you persisting in that employment. When they teed up the questions for me coming into today, they asked me, go ahead and list out your favorite scene and ask questions about it. So my favorite scene is actually the most difficult scene, and perhaps it was difficult for some of you too, which is to watch Clarence go through being effectively terminated from the program as a result of him losing his position at Clean Slate. And so I guess, John, why did you choose that? Why did you all choose that film or that piece as part of the general story, and what do you think is the lesson inherently in that, as painful as it was to watch?
I think it is one of those skills that is just so difficult. I mean, everybody is challenged when they are confronted in that way, and so seeing Clarence wrestle with that we just felt like that had to be a part of the film.
I think there's also an element of it you know, from the very beginning of the film, the arrangement with Kara was, and this was even at Kara's deeper insistence than ours, this can't be an ad for Kara. Kara happens to be the setting for the stories of these people, but it is not a video, you know, designed to be an ad for Kara. And it seemed like the film also would lack credibility if everybody's road up was a road up. So, you know, Clarence's story was never that clean, and he had, you know, real challenges getting back into the swing of things in the workforce. But then there's also the element of, you know, when you watch that, is there something about how Kara's processing Clarence as well that is complicated? Did they do right by Clarence? Just as so, the complexity of that moment and the sort of not prettiness of it, the sadness of it, really seemed to sort of be one way to make sure that we are constantly grounding people in the reality of the work of workforce development, which is that, as Jesse says, you can't save everybody, and it doesn't always succeed.
And sometimes it's not, you know, the first time out of the gate. So when I first watched this film, I said, well, should the title actually be The Road Up? Question mark, you know, that it's actually up, down, all around. It's all of these things. And, you know, Kara, the organization, when people watch this film, they get agitated by that scene because it's like, y'all, you did not do right by this young man. And so that's one of the conundrums that these employment social enterprises face, is the tension between, to what degree do we want to build the rigor that readies an individual for what might happen in the traditional workplace, and to what degree do we want to show up as a compassionate, supportive space in place for people to find their home. And that tension is something that they struggle with, but the reason why they struggle with that tension is to kind of generate stickier retention down the road.
Also, if you wanted to talk real quick about sort of how did Kara then, I mean, Kara's also changed since then too. So, you know, I know there were some things that Kara is doing now to deal with exactly that.
For sure. Watching it on the screen ourselves, and also hearing the feedback from so many, and also seeing now how workplaces are growing to become more and more inclusive over time, we held a mirror to our own practices and said, yikes, it shouldn't be 4 strikes, it should be X. You know, how do we create more runway, more kind of dress rehearsal that is safe in our space with our employment social enterprises before we place people into more traditional employment downstream? I'm gonna start rounding out the end as we prepare for the next piece of our time together, but I wanna reflect on Jesse. So Jesse is a bit of this larger-than-life character. He's what we in the industry might call a leader with lived experience, and that is to say the lived experience of the people that are ultimately employed by these businesses. Why was it important for him and for you to share his personal story as part of the Kara transformation?
Well, you know, that scene, the end of the film, really is what happens at the end of the class. And so we wanted to hold that to the end so that the audience would have the same experience that the students had. And so it was just really organic to the film, to the process, to how Jesse teaches the class.
Yeah, he's such a mystery to people.
Yeah.
For the first 4 weeks of the class. I mean, when you hear people saying, like, what did he do? When you ask what did he, like, people really have no idea. And so it's sort of fascinating because he becomes this source of like conversation within the class. And then when he tells that story, it all comes together. All the lessons that he has taught are woven into that story in various ways, and it sort of explains both the process and it explains Jesse. And there was stuff in there even then that we couldn't use, and that's really the scene where you can hear us sniffling the most in the footage, because there are things that happen later in that class that are some of the most powerful things we've ever had the privilege to film.
And so Jesse is, as he admits inside the film, he's in recovery of addiction. And many people that are in this work will say being in recovery is actually a much broader notion than just being in recovery of addiction. If you dig deeper into his story, he was in recovery of a broken heart. And he was trying to navigate through being in recovery of a broken heart, and that led to his depression, which led to protracted unemployment, which led to his experience in substance addiction. And so I say all that to say, when we talk about these issues, one of our big asks of you all is to go upstream. Right now, people tend to talk about the micro issue of the moment. We'll go upstream. What was the seminal incident that created that current moment? In Jesse's case, he's recovery of a broken heart, and oh, what happened as a result. And finally, I'll say that he, as a leader with lived experience, these are the leaders that we're betting on as a sector. That if leaders with lived experience are leading these employment social enterprises, might they be more equipped to build more sustainable solutions for the future, to help people be on economic, or pathways to economic mobility that stick and stay. So last question would be on COVID. So obviously we weren't masking up, there wasn't a thing. Social distancing, this was filmed in 2016 or so.
Yeah.
And so pre-COVID, so do the lessons still resonate, Greg? I guess, like, how is this topic relevant to you in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I just realized that this is the first time we've actually seen you in person in almost exactly 2 years, so that's hugely relevant and awesome. But you know, when we finished the film, or we're finishing the film, this was November, December of 2019 or so, beginning of 2020, and you know, unemployment is 3.8%, and as many times as we tried to say to people that the intersection of race, place, and poverty is the most important question that we have to get at, and this is a great and urgent film. You know, for a lot of people, racial equity in particular wasn't front and center. Then 2020 happens, the pandemic, which obviously shines a spotlight on all the health inequities and all inequities of all sorts, and then of course George Floyd and the summer of BLM as well. So by the time we got through that, I think it had sort of become a filter for people to see a movie about second chances, a movie about unemployment, a movie about poverty and racial equity is about as 2020 as it gets. And I think those themes unfortunately remain evergreen. So what we have been doing with the film since then is really, we have an impact campaign that accompanies it that is focusing on, it started to focus on companies, actually, because what we discovered was that there were companies that, you know, they put the black square up, but they, you know, then they needed to back it up. So how do you kind of create spaces for conversations about these very challenging, sometimes tripwire topics? And so we've had screenings with, you know, Google and McKinsey and Aon and companies like that, using it for different purposes. Sometimes for a DEI conversation, sometimes as a way to kind of energize support for inclusive employment policies. And that's been a huge surprise that we did not expect at all, and amazing. And now we're hoping, as we can start to meet in person again, that we can start to broaden that, and conferences and you know, nonprofit organizations and issue-specific organizations, and really bring this around the country as a way to have conversations about, you know, use it as a tool to kind of have these challenging, difficult, but completely urgent and completely necessary and unfortunately evergreen conversations.
I think that's a great notion to end on. So as a double click on that advertisement, if the movie resonated with you at all, and you can see it as a launching pad for conversations either inside your firm, inside organizations, they are taking this on the road virtually and in person. And for me, the vehicle that it drives is an ability to center the conversation on real people. Sometimes we get lost in the abstractions of concepts, but this is the story of 4 human beings with real stories and real recovery and real journeys on up. So if that's of interest to you, please ask one of these 2 dudes later this afternoon, and we look forward to getting to the next phase of our event.
Oh, great.
Oh,
Wow.
dang,
Who knew?
okay.
Great.
Cool, cool. Any questions that y'all have for these nice people?
There's always going to be the brave first person. Yeah.
Okay. On, off. I don't need a mic. I need the mic for the. What's your hope for this film?
Our hope was, well, you know, I think if somebody had said to show it at the New York Federal Reserve, we would have said you're crazy. So that, check that box, definitely. But in all seriousness, I think that we want as many people as possible to get to know Clarence and Elisa and Tamala and Kristen and Jesse. And we want as many people as possible to see the work of Kara as representative of the hard work of workforce development in general. And really, we want people to use it as a tool. There are all sorts of different ways that you can kind of use the film as a jumping off point for to talk about all kinds of things. And so we feel like, in a way, what Maria was just saying, the way it sort of softens the ground as these human stories. You know, when you're just put in a room and asked to talk about vulnerable things with each other, that's hard. But if you kind of are asked to talk about vulnerable things through the filter of these other people who you've come to know and the vulnerabilities you've seen them express, suddenly it becomes easier. It just sort of softens the ground and I think eases some of the political division a bit too. Wait a minute, your niece went through that as well? Because I had an aunt who had the same problem. And I think, you know, as a sort of there but for the grace of God go I film, I think it can really help pull people together. So I think, you know, if it can spark change in corporate policies and opinions about inclusive employment, that would be amazing as well. So I think those are really our hope. And as the poster says and Jesse says, without hope, there's nothing.
I have two questions from different angles. The first is, were the participants compensated for their contributions to the film? And two, can you give me some examples of inclusive employment policies that were changed at places like, say, Google or wherever you've quoted, on account of seeing the film?
On the first one, we don't, in documentaries, pay for people's participation. But what we have tried to do is, in some of these conversations with corporations, with any audience, we try to get some kind of compensation if the participants in the film are part of that conversation. So in that sense, we do, but not during the making of it.
Yep, but they're paid an honorarium if they speak on behalf of the film after the fact. On the second question, I'll give you a practical example for a financial institution. A financial institution watched the film and then started looking at their job descriptions for kind of frontline, I'll call them retail banking positions. And they said, these are eligible. Like, we've pushed down the barriers. Like, there's no college requirement. There's no high school graduation requirement. We pushed down the barriers as far as we can. Go forth and prosper. And we took those job descriptions with the reduced barriers that they suggested and brought them to our folks that were eligible for those jobs and said, would you apply? Check this out for me. Would you apply? And they said, they all, to a person, we asked 10 or 12, that they wouldn't. And when we asked why, it was because the language in the job descriptions was too lofty, or it said preferred skills with this like weird banking acronym that they didn't understand, or. We took that feedback back to the bank, they re-engineered the job descriptions, and that unlocked a new potential pool. So it's even micro actions like that as a result of just having a widened perspective around inclusion that we hope that the film can trigger over time.
Question from the online audience, and it says, what surprised you most about making the film and the people you met?
Oh boy, this is probably one, it's a great question, online people, and it's one that I would probably answer differently every time it's asked. I think the thing that was really the most amazing, and I think John probably feels the same way, is the universality of Jesse's lessons. We would spend the day in transformations and filming and watching the events unfold. And then we would kind of pack up our stuff and we'd be heading back to our car, and there'd be this sense of like, hey, did Jesse look right into your soul today too? And there's just so much that he says that is applicable to everybody. And that I think we went into it thinking that we were going to watch people change. And I think we did not expect to go into it and then change ourselves. Because of that. So even just the other day, my daughter had called with some issue or texted with some issue, and that she had kind of screwed up. And I said, well, as Jesse says, you are not your mistake. You got to take responsibility for them. You have to own them, but you are not your mistake. So his lessons were there right from the very beginning for us and stay, absolutely.
And, in the course of this, we've done this for years, we've done many films, and we always become close with our subjects. But I think because of the nature of this, it just was a much more intense bond with all of the individuals, Jesse included, the organization as well, but especially the 4 individuals. They really, we just formed a very close, tight bond, which was surprising and wonderful and really beautiful.
The narrative is served well by following those 4 individuals. I think you get the sense that, 2 of them are generally heading up and 2 of them maybe not so much by the end of the film. But I'm just wondering about the bigger picture numbers. Do we have a sense of how effective CARA is? And is there any reasonable comparison to like not being in CARA? How well do those people do, or some other organization? I don't want to hitch my hopes to the 2 ones doing positive as outliers if the overall picture is bleaker than what it might seem in the film.
Maybe I'll take a stab at that one. Just for context setting, there are 10 million people in America that are boxed out of today's economy because of some of the barriers that you saw in today's film. And so these businesses are intended to break those down, quite obviously. And in terms of the persistence ratio, perhaps that's one way of looking at it at an organization like CARA. Their 1-year job retention, so now in private industry working for an organization outside of the social enterprises that CARA serves, their stickiness ratio was 70% at 1 year. For context, the Department of Labor will report 50% for the same industries that they serve. So we like to be able to talk about this not just as a moral imperative, but as a business imperative to help resolve the labor shortage. Y'all, I think we got a wrap. It's 1:59. She's got a red sign. Awesome. Let's give it up for these 2 gentlemen right here.
Thank you so much.
A couple times I had to walk out of the room just because it was so intense. My name is David Erickson. I head the Community Development Department here at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and I am super excited that you're all here. I recognize this is kind of a scary building. It looks like a castle, and there are bars on the wall. There are bars on the windows, and there's police force. There's quite a bit of gold in the basement, by the way. So that's part of why there's so many police are wandering about. And we recognize it's freezing in here, so we're trying to get the temperature up a bit. This is our first public event that we've had since the pandemic is over, and I know that's part of why I'm thrilled to see you here. And we know we have a couple hundred more people online, and so this is a kind of a new world where it's sort of a live studio audience here, and but we want to be mindful of our online audience as well. So JD, thank you for reading that one question. We'll try to bring you in as often as we can, so please stay connected to us. The mission of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is to create an economy that works for all segments of society, and so part of why I'm thrilled about what the contributions we can make in the Community Development Department is that we can highlight examples where banks and other investors could make investments into entities that really can sort of create opportunity where there wasn't before. And so one of the things I have to say, as a person who's done anti-poverty work and community development work for 25 years, the data around job training is not stellar. It's frustrating that it's not as effective as it should be. But my friend Carla Javits years ago sort of sat me down and just said, look, there are other ways to do this. It's not just try to train somebody for a hypothetical job, that if you really sort of provide someone with the wraparound services they need while they're being trained and then connect them to a social enterprise that has a double bottom line where they are a business with a cash flow, but they also have some flexibility and they know they're playing a social role as well in bringing those people who were trained into that business and with some extra flexibility, that model is very successful. And so when when Carla asked if we could have this conference here to be the first one of our sort of reopening of the bank, I was thrilled to say yes to that, and thrilled that all of you would be interested in coming. I love that last question. Is how successful is care? We're going to hear from a lot of other examples today. So you've come to the right place. So and I think one of the things, I'm going to hand this over here in 1 minute to my colleague Javier Silva. But one thing that we saw in the film, there's something that really appeals to the heart here, where one of the people who was focused on, she gets a job in a hospital helping patients. She's feeling proud about that she walks into her apartment where they give her the keys to the apartment, this smile across her face, she's just beaming. There's something about the dignity that comes with that. But there's another piece to this that's not just to the heart, it appeals to the head as well, which is that, and this is something that our president, John Williams, just said in a fireside chat he had with the Surgeon General 2 days ago, which was, there's a real need to invest in the upstream social determinants of health because the economy is crying out for more workers and better trained workers. So this is really an important economic question as well. And this is an important, we're all better off, not just because we're helping each other out in with these kinds of interventions, but that we're better off financially. The woman you saw in that film, she's paying taxes, she's paying rent, she's helping people, get better in the hospital where she's working. So there's lots of benefits to this approach. I'm really excited we're here today to talk about it. And by the way, we're having a reception afterwards, so please stay and join us for that too. So we'd really like to sort of get to know you a little bit better and maybe trade some ideas and some business cards and things like that, like we did in the old days, starting at 4:15. So thank you again for joining, and now I'll just introduce my colleague Javier Silva.
All right, thank you, everybody. It's so exciting to be here today. Welcome to this virtual hybrid event. So I want to say good afternoon to everyone who's joining us online. Thank you to everybody who's here in person. I'm Javier Silva, Senior Associate Director at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's Community Development Unit. I have to say before I continue, the views expressed here are my own, don't represent those of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or the Federal Reserve System. So, one question that I have, and David, you brought this up in your comments just now, is, what do we lose as a nation? Right? What do communities lose? What do businesses lose? I mean, what are we losing when families are not able to sustain themselves, right? And I always like to flip that question on its head and ask, what do we gain? And we gain a lot through this effort, through this work that we're doing. And I like the direction over the last couple of years where these social enterprises have really taken root, because I think in the past, and David, you mentioned this earlier this week, that in the past, doing the job training and then just letting people loose to fend on their own, that's tough. That's really hard if you don't have the wraparound services assisting you to get to the next level. And so bearing that in mind, it takes a lot of work to do this work, and we want to do our part. A few years ago, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York participated with the Federal Reserve System to work on investing in America's workforce. And that was a project, a multi-year project, which brought together workforce development research and resources and thinking around workforce development. It's 3 volumes. I mean, it's pretty thick, and it took a lot of time from a lot of resources to put that together. But I did want to mention that as well. And then also, as I think about how we retooled how community development thinks about our work, we're focused on 3 themes: climate change and adaptation, household financial stability, and health, and looking at the social determinants of health. And if you kind of think about those 3 themes, the workforce component is really important. I'll give you an example. On climate resiliency and adaptation, in Puerto Rico, just looking at solar installations, right, to become resilient, and down on the island, you have about 2,000 installers there, but the island needs about 19,000 workers to get to scale. And so bringing everyone into the workforce is incredibly important to meet those goals. And that's just kind of a snapshot. You think of here in New York City with Local Law 97 that's coming online, there's just a huge demand for a trained workforce, and we need to bring everyone together to meet those goals. And these are just kind of smaller examples of where this work can go. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. A few housekeeping things. Restrooms are out through the hallway back there. There's a coat check. You can get on Wi-Fi. There's instructions on how to get onto the Wi-Fi. No food or drink in the auditorium. And with that, Maria Kim, President and CEO of REDF, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maria Kim. I have the honor to serve as President and CEO of REDF. And I'm the last one on the train to welcome you to Expanding Opportunity, Investing in Employment Social Enterprise. So there's probably some of you out there that are like, when you heard or read the words employment social enterprise, you kind of cocked your head to the side and you were like, what exactly are they talking about? And that's okay if that's you, because that's what we're going to unpack and unfold over the course of this afternoon. What you need to know is basically this. They are businesses that are doing a good or service for the world, and they're anchored in a social purpose. And that social purpose is to create on-ramps back to employment, to hire people whose talent has been overlooked all across the country. And their talent may have been overlooked because of a variety of employment barriers. Think perhaps people who've been impacted by the justice system, people who've experienced homelessness, people who've experienced generational poverty, maybe young people who are disconnected from school, disconnected from work, maybe refugees coming to this country in search of hope, maybe people who are survivors of domestic violence or survivors of human trafficking. And the thing about these barriers is that they're not discrete. They're not like one and done. Like you check it off and it's like boom, boom, we're all good. They're often competing and compounding, and they stack up on top of each other to make the entry back to employment super tough. And so that's why these employment social enterprises exist. They exist to both be like the triage, I suppose, so some of the community and the supportive services that you saw in the film earlier today, the triage to help address the acute challenges of poverty and unemployment, and also kind of the trampoline, like the place where you can build your skills, build your chops, build your resume, be employed, increase your marketability, and ultimately be on a pathway towards economic mobility. And the thing about it is, they're all over the place if you just open your eyes and look around and consciously consume from them. In fact, in New York, I'll highlight a few in case these generate some ideas. You've got Center for Employment Opportunities and the Doe Fund. So CEO and the Doe Fund, they both work with people coming out of incarceration, people impacted by the justice system, people experiencing homelessness, to clean and keep safe and vibrant our retail corridors, business corridors, our communities, and our highways. You've got Knowledge House and Hope Works. These are two organizations that work with young people disconnected from school and help them to build skills and attach to rising careers in tech. You've got Sweet Generation. This is an artisan bakery, and I think we're going to be able to taste their goodies later this afternoon, at least for the folks that are in-house today. And Grayston Bakery, who actually sums up the kind of thesis of employment social enterprise in their own advertising. They say something like, we don't hire people to bake brownies. We bake brownies to hire people. So effectively, they're reminding us that their business is merely a means to a mission, and the mission is to reconnect overlooked talent back to the power of work. Last model I'll share in New York is Conbody. Here's an organization that is a fitness business, and the method for their fitness business was developed by their founder while he was in solitary confinement in prison. And all the staff that teach his method to lots of rising athletes in New York and beyond are all formerly incarcerated themselves. So that's the notion of employment social enterprise, a business that uses its business as a means to this larger mission. And today we're going to start wide and kind of go down, down, down and deeper to deepen your understanding about this notion. We'll start high up with Chet Hewitt, a fierce leader in this space, the CEO of Sierra Health Foundation, a foundation that gets the intersection of health, racial equity, and racial justice. Chet will be followed by Maurice Jones and Charles Phillips of 110 and Recognize, respectively, former president of Oracle. And the two of them will share their journey to help advance 1 million Black Americans over the next 10 years through the initiative called 110. Then we're going to nerd out a little bit on finance. We're going to talk to Bank of America. We'll talk to our own impact investing fund. And we'll explore ways in which we can unlock creative sources of capital for entrepreneurs who want to scale. And we'll rest on one very powerful social enterprise in Chicago. It's called Sweet Beginnings. We'll be joined by them and LISC, and they'll share the story of their business, the business of Sweet Beginnings, and also kind of the role of love in their own work as well. I'll say that if you're passionate like we are about building an economy that works for everyone, this agenda was kind of tailor-made for you. My only ask of you all and of you out in the interwebs, wherever you might be, is to lean in. Don't zoom out. This one is a conversation where I want you to lean in. I want you to lean in hard because we're on the, hopefully, other side of this thing, of these multiple pandemics that have occupied our hearts, minds, and bodies for the last 2 years. And frankly, we only have one shot. We only have one shot to kind of build the economy that we want, the world that we want. We have to actively resist the temptation to go back to normal. We have to actively lean in to creating a new next. Got to do it. And I'm really excited that the person that will help us set the tone for that first up is Chet Hewitt. And so I do his incredible credentials justice. Allow me to read directly from his bio. Chet P. Hewitt is president and CEO of the Sierra Health Foundation and the Center at Sierra Health Foundation. Under his leadership, both organizations are committed to boldly advancing health equity, social justice, and community-powered economic development in underserved communities in California. Chet has held senior positions in the public and nonprofit sectors, where he's known for his innovative and thoughtful risk-taking. He's an Annie E. Casey Children and Families Leadership Fellow. He serves on several boards, including REDF, Resources Legacy Fund, Public Policy Institute of California, and Advance Peace. In 2017, Chet received the Terrence Keenan Leadership Award, one of the highest honors in health philanthropy. And in 2021, the National Academy of Public Administration inducted Chet into its Academy of Fellows, placing him among just 940 other prominent leaders who hold this title for life, including cabinet officers, members of Congress, governors, mayors, and state legislators, as well as prominent scholars, business execs, and public administrators. Here's to creating a new day. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Chet Hewitt.
Thank you very much. Honored to be here. I was waiting for the photo to come up here. This is a photograph from the front of a newspaper in Sacramento, where the foundation is headquartered and where I live. That was produced after they learned of my story, which I'm going to share with you today. Very proud of my story, although they thought that I might have some problems with them telling it. But I've been in a number of media trainings, and one thing you learn is if someone's going to say something about you, you should always be involved, right? So you could help influence how that's done. And as I tell my story, I think you'll understand why. So as Maria, thank you for that warm introduction, said about me, I'm the president and CEO of the Sierra Health Foundation and its center, which is called the Center at Sierra Health. And we are a social determinants of health foundation. We have focused on the social determinants of health over the past 14 years. I've had the privilege of serving as its president. And if you know anything about the social determinants of health, it's basically the idea that your health is more than about your access to clinical care. In fact, in this business, we know 85% of your health has nothing to do with clinical care. Clinical care is really important when you're sick, right? That other 85% of the time, it's the things that you do, the choices that you make in your life that actually keep you healthy. And one of the most important is the opportunity to work. Productive activity actually has a prophylactic effect on individuals. And we know that people who work are healthier. And not just because you get your health care, at least most of us still do, through a job. At the center, we're very proud of the work that we actually do. Over the past 2.5 years, we have managed over $300 million of investment in some of the poorest communities in California. In large part to battle the pandemic, support and services to farm workers, and workers who often don't have the kind of protections and the ability to work from home, which is how we protected ourselves. Workers who work in supermarkets and gas stations, places that could not close. We've helped people with rental assistance and mortgage insurance, because we don't want people who are laid off to lose their home, which is one of the fastest ways to lose your wealth in this country. It's been a phenomenal, phenomenal effort, and I get to lead an incredible team to do that work. Previous to that, I served as the first African-American director of the Alameda County Social Service Agency. Now, Alameda County is a home to Oakland, California, and Berkeley, California, a county of about 1.4 million people. And I was known for using technology to make the delivery of public services more dignified. So we were one of the first places to allow folks to enroll in food and nutritional programs through food banks, so you wouldn't have to show up at the welfare office. Or to sign up for publicly supported health care through a clinic. That got a lot of attention and a lot of awards. Previous to that, I served as the county's child welfare worker. And I led its child welfare department. And I was recruited to that job because that system was failing, and I was supposed to be a turnaround leader, which meant that I was supposed to get things fixed. And we managed to do that in about a year, which was considered the fastest turnaround in the history of any threatened child welfare system in the state of California. Not only did we fix the things that were wrong, which were largely regulatory, but we also did things like write the 4E waiver for the state of California, which allowed us to change the way we could use money designed to support families. So less out-of-home placement and more investment in keeping kids at home safely with the people who love them most. That has helped to influence how we think about child welfare in America. Now, I was recruited to that job from a fellowship at a large foundation based here in New York City, where I worked for a number of years. The foundation is the namesake of the center that holds New York City's Christmas tree. All right? While there, I worked on a number of programs around employment, Jobs Plus, the Corporation for Supportive Housing, where I met my great friend Carla Javits, community building as a field, the creation of Policy Link, a national policy center, and I managed the center's investments, the foundation's investments in national policy centers as well. Before coming to that foundation, I worked at another foundation as a fellow, one of 10 selected that year for my work, Children and Family Services. And interesting enough, in that fellowship where I had multiple placements, one was in Alameda County. And so I was recruited years later to become its child welfare director and ultimately its director because I had spent some of my fellowship there time. And before being at that foundation, which was founded by an individual who started the company that delivers goods in those famous brown trucks. I was nominated for that fellowship because I had actually, after law school, started a program called the Detention Diversion Advocacy Project. We took kids who had been incarcerated, and rather than keep them in detention, we actually took them back to court, asked for the freedom, built a case management plan so they could actually return to community safely. Now, I told you a lot about my resume, did it in reverse order, and you're probably wondering, well, why did he share all that information? Well, two things. We're talking about the power of employment. One of the powers of employment is that when you're employed and you do extraordinary work, people actually come to find you to give you new opportunities. Not one of the jobs that I described did I ever apply for. People actually sought me out, recruiters and other folks. You build networks of people engaged in productive activity. They sometimes talk you up to other people who are looking for workers, and you can build a network and a pathway that forms the basis of your career. Now, that part of the story is a part of my life that you hear about when I'm introduced. What I just did for you in 4 or 5 minutes or 6 minutes, whatever it was to give you 30 years of my life. It's about half. You all know about how old I am. What people never hear about is the first half of that journey, because that's very different. So I was born right here in New York City in a public housing development on the other side of the ferry that leaves from Battery Park. One of 8 kids, known as Millie's 8 kids, 4 boys, 4 girls. She was quite equitable in her distribution of gender in my household, although the women did run everything. My incredible, loving sisters. I was a good kid. They say I was pretty smart. Did really very well in school most of my life. But as I became a young teen, my father was ill, ultimately dying, and I really fell off. Things changed dramatically. I was out in the streets, started drinking at a very young age, dabbling in drugs, ultimately stopped going to school. One day, after being re-enrolled for the second time, I got into a series of fights with some kids at the school that actually transcended the school environment and ended up in my community. At the age of 16, I was arrested and held in detention at the Brooklyn Detention Center. Now, Brooklyn is a borough my family is originally from. And I can tell you, the Brooklyn House of Detention is no place for a 16-year-old. I would argue it's no place for anybody. In the film, one of the young women talks about her time being incarcerated. She talks about how horrible it was and fearful. And you can imagine what a 16-year-old incarcerated with grown-ups, what that must have been like. After being released and going through trial, I was sentenced to time on that famous prison island in New York's East River. It's often in the papers, even to this very day. The city has still never found out what to do with it. And at 17, incarcerated with adults, I thought things were never going to be okay for the rest of my life. The only thing that came of that particular situation that had any positive outlook to it was the fact that because I was underage, I was actually forced to go to school. And therein I got my general equivalency diploma and finished high school. There are things that I experienced there that I have never told anybody. Not my wife of 20 years, or even friends that I've had lifelong relationships with. And I won't speak about them today. When I came home, I was committed to living a better life. And the first thing I did was go to find a job. But I can tell you, at that time, with the economy moving from manufacturing to a knowledge economy, it was incredibly difficult. And being a young black man, fresh from being incarcerated, little chance to find a job. Search far and wide, no takers. A friend of mine did manage to get me a job. I actually washed cars on a car lot. I thought it was pretty cool. Got paid every day. I realized later on that I was really a day laborer. Because when I tried to use that experience to go and apply for another job, which I thought I would get, the gentleman, when I called them back, told me that they were not going to hire me because I had lied on my application. He said that I had written that I had actually wrote or worked at this car dealership. But when they called there, they said that I did not work there. And then I realized that if you are a day laborer and you get paid under the table every day, you don't get to use that type of employment for a reference. So I did what most young black men during that time would do, as I went back to the streets where I came from. Engaged in behavior that I knew over some period of time would bring me back into contact with the very system I was trying to escape. And it may seem like, well, that seems pretty foolish. Why would you do that? But I will tell you, as a young man with no way of supporting myself and no other pathway, that seemed a lot more rational than it does in this room today. But things changed one day when I was standing in the middle of the playground in the middle of the housing project that many folks said that I terrorized. And two men walked up to me. And they said, "Chet, we know you're smart. We know you have a good heart. We have something for you." And in a way that 19-year-olds can sometimes, who think they know more than they actually do, can be, I said, "Nah, I'm good." They told me it was a job. Now, I'm a pretty old guy. This was not a social enterprise. It was an old Civilian Employment Training Act. And if you know policy, you know what that was. There was a time in this country where if you were struggling for a job, they would actually employ you for up to 18 months at a time, with the hope that if they underwrote your salary, the business you work for might actually hire you after 18 months. It was kind of like a paid internship. It was like a road test as a prospective employee. Those two gentlemen, Richard Finelli and Wayne Derrick, names I will never forget. Names I will never forget. I remember telling them when they offered me the job, which was to work in a YMCA outstation that they were going to do in the middle of the housing project that I lived in, that perhaps they should not offer me the job. Perhaps that was better suited for a friend of mine, who at the time I thought was more deserving. But as they told me, there are no undeserving people, a theme that was also in the movie. They said, "You both deserve it, but we picked you because you actually need it more." And in that moment, you learn the difference between mercy and grace. You see, mercy is the ability to have empathy and compassion for somebody you really believe deserves it. Grace is the ability to have empathy and compassion for people who sometimes think they don't. And if you can see beyond a person's mistakes, and you believe that you are not your deeds, then perhaps you can see something extraordinary in someone that may not be so evident. That job was a pivot point for me. So I can tell you, given the times, moving into the early 80s, crack and drugs and all kinds of things happening, being young, black, with a high school diploma from a prison island in the city of New York, one need not have any predictive analytics to determine where I was likely heading. But that job changed things. I was trained here at the YMCA headquarters on 34th Street. Learned about de-escalation, how to show up in time, all those harder soft skills we talked about in the movie. At the end of my 18 months, I actually was nervous again because I said, who was going to hire me, even after all this time? I had earned enough time and vacation and other things that I actually moved to San Francisco. I didn't move. I took a trip to San Francisco on vacation to actually visit a friend. That friend told me that there was a potential job opening after he learned what I did at a Catholic school that sat on the top of the hill in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district. And he said, maybe you should apply. And I did. I used his phone number because we didn't have cell phones back then. And within 3 days, they called me and offered me the job. I called back Richard Finelli, the man who offered me a job, because that's who I worked for. I said, Richard, I'm not coming back. I think I may have found my path. That job, that transformative moment, that moment of grace, of opportunity, conveyed from two individuals to a young person, is what led to all the things that you heard me introduce by. I want to end my story to you with 3 points and a question. The first point is that if you believe that young people, and particularly people of color in poor communities, don't have any talent or anything to offer society, you are wrong. Because you can think that this story is about Chet and Chet's accolades, but that's not true. Because what this story is about, and what I think I represent, is the extraordinary talent that's in those communities that most time never has the good fortune to escape. It's not just about me. Think about all the artists and directors, and mechanics, and scientists. Think about all the talent. Think about where we might be. The 10 million people Maria referenced were liberated from the confines of unemployment and a lack of opportunity. What could we possibly create? Point number 2. For us to be successful in this work, we have to be intentional and it has to be sustainable. So what does that mean? We have to be intentional about creating employment opportunities through employment social enterprises and other devices, as we were about creating the mechanisms that have held people back. Now, part of my journey I spent in law school. And I will tell you, we studied things like mass incarceration and how we ended up there. And I will tell you those things, and those systems were well designed, they were intentional, with lots of investment behind them. If we want to right those wrongs and address those things, we're going to have to be as intentional and as willing to invest in things that promote health and well-being as we were for things that created hopelessness and chaos. That's going to be essential. And we have to do it in ways that are going to be sustainable, because CETA came and went because of the political winds that didn't like its outcomes. Employment social enterprise at least provides the kind of private capital investments so that what we do that's good for people isn't subject to the political winds. The third thing I would say is that there is a role for all of us in this particular work. I, you, we collectively, as we get behind the developmental work that actually produces good things for people, people who deserve it, young, old, and anywhere in between. Because the outcome of this work shouldn't be that we get to celebrate people that we refer to as game changers. The work is to change the game. That's what we have got to do. I said I had 3 points and a question. And so here's my question to all of you. If you could do the things I just described and produce people who may have started with my story, but have my ending, how could you not want to be part of something like that? Thank you for allowing me to tell my story.
So next up is Maurice Jones and Charles Phillips, and they're going to reflect on the changing of the game through an initiative called 110, whose thesis is to help advance 1 million Black Americans over the next 10 years. So let's have Maurice and Charles join the conversation.
Well, good afternoon, I think, depending on where you're tuning in from. Good morning as well. Charles, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. So I'm going to try to help direct our conversation. What I wanted to do with you to start with, you're one of the founders of 110. I wanted to ask you to kick us off by really telling us the story of the origins of 110, how you and a few others came to the conclusion that 110 needed to be launched and work to be done. So can you take us back and tell us that story?
Sure, happy to. And first of all, I want to thank the Federal Reserve of New York for doing this. This is great to see it involved in this sort of work. Some of you probably don't know I served on the board there for 3 years, and so a lot of respect for the institution. And that big old scary building, not too scary to me. So, but nonetheless, good to see you guys doing this. So 110 started really around the all the news stories and concern and shock after George Floyd. And what happened was there's an organization called the Business Council, which is kind of the largest 250 CEOs in the country, roughly. A professional organization. They get together all the time to share best practices and kind of normal CEO club. And it's, pretty well known throughout the country. I'm a member, several other Black CEOs were members as well. And they called and said, given what has happened and all the questions that the companies are getting, the CEOs themselves also have concerns about, okay, what is the proper response? Their employees are asking them a lot of questions. They have Black employees as well. And so one of the roles of these organizations is to get everybody together and talk about things and share best practices and come up with ideas. And people have different, areas of expertise. And so they called myself and Ken Frazier, that time was CEO of Merck, and then Ken Chenault, who was the former CEO of American Express, who were on the board there as well. We're all good friends for many years and members of the same organization. And they asked us to come on and speak about the moment and just have a discussion, essentially about a broad topic of race relations in America. And so after we thought about it the night before and trying to figure out what exactly would we say to add on to what was going on, because they could read the news like we could, we decided that we had to give them something constructive to do, which is the best. Is a unique moment in time that the concern over kind of race relations and this awakening in America around race discussions could be an opportunity. And so the idea we discussed was coming up, with the idea of hiring 1 million Black people over the next 10 years. And basically, rough math, that's not a big number relative to the 35 million people, Black people at the time. And we thought it was doable. It's a long period of time. I had done some pre-work on that concept with a policy organization called Black Economic Alliance, but there was never any demand for actually doing it. So we thought about it, I'd read about it, and I remember the white paper, I shared that, and here's how you would do it. You'd get these talent developers into a network, and these companies, if they will commit to the demand, actually makes some sense. I think it's doable. So we got on the call the next day and started discussing the idea and suggesting it, and to see if it was something remotely acceptable to people, because we hadn't run it by anyone. And to our surprise, got a very good reaction on the call. People were looking for something to do, and these are business people that like to execute, they want to plan. And so the response was, well, develop the plan a little bit more, come back with a proposal. How much is this going to cost? We're interested. And what type of people are out there we can hire? Where are they? All the 1,000 questions. And so thus began 110. We had started building an organization, and then we had the good fortune of finding a good CEO, Maurice, to kind of finish the job for us and kind of take this and build it into something real. But the concept of these companies said, we'll commit to hiring. We don't have enough workers anyway. The timing of this, right? We had the 11 million job openings right now. And it looks like that we're ignoring an entire pool of people that possibly could be talent relevant to some of these jobs. We'd like to know more about that. So that was kind of the beginnings of it.
And to lay that out, when you look at the data, this is about ultimately removing a systemic barrier to, in this case, Black talent earning their way into the middle class in America. When you look at the data, if you look at jobs around the country now that pay $60,000 or more, on paper, 79% of them require that you have a 4-year degree just to compete. If you look at jobs that pay $40,000 or more, on paper, 71% of them require that you have a 4-year degree just to compete. And then when you look at Black talent in the workforce, ages 25 and above, 76% of us do not yet have a 4-year degree. And so this journey at its heart is about really eliminating a barrier to talent earning their way into the middle class. And oh, by the way, 66% of all talent in the workforce, period, do not yet have a 4-year degree. So that's, if you will, that's the big problem to be solved with respect to this journey that we're on right now. Charles, talk about the solutions. Talk about the way in which we need to build an ecosystem about this effort in order for it to work. Companies, talent developers, et cetera.
Yeah, well, you mentioned one of the barriers being the college degree, and I think one of the initiatives we took on was to get these companies, and we now have, I think, some like 70 companies or so, to recode some of those jobs. And do you really need a college degree for this specific role? And in some cases, the person who was leaving the job and retiring did not have a college degree, but when they go to hire the next person, they put that requirement in by default. And so recoding jobs was part of it, but there were many other barriers. There's the proximity problem. A lot of Black people live in segregated communities. They aren't around these employers. Secondly, if you didn't have that college degree, you may not have the confidence to go apply for a job at all. We talked about earlier some of the language differences and how people describe jobs. So there are a lot of different things that prevented people from even wanting to attempt to try some of these jobs. And then the heads of HR, they may be well-meaning, but they have a process and they've always done things a certain way. Recruit from the same colleges, they hit their number, they move on. There was little incentive for them to do something different without some push from the top. And so the idea was, okay, if we can get the CEOs in to provide that push, and I think we came up with enough, arguments for them to get involved. Besides being a good thing to do and needing the workers, it's good for the country. And so we sold that a lot just by saying, look, you want people to have jobs, you want people to pay taxes, you want them to have fewer entitlements, all the things that you talk about all the time. Well, if people are working, all those good things happen. So, and let's make this happen. So if we can connect them to Black people in some way, and we chose the workforce development programs or talent developers, as we call them. And the problem is there's thousands of them because it's highly localized. Few of them have scale. The average program probably does 200 or 300 a year if they're lucky. And the companies don't have time to figure that out. There's too much fragmentation and friction. I can't hire from 55 different talent developers if I'm just trying to get 300 jobs. That's somebody else has to do that. So that marketplace in between is the idea. Can you connect all these specialty training organizations? And they differ by job role, by skill set, by location, by industry, and somehow knit them into a network so it's easy for the people who want to hire to see where they go to find people. And vice versa, the people who do the training, they need to make sure that there's a job for these people once they go through the 3 months or 4 months of training or whatever it is. There needs to be a job waiting so people have confidence that if I go through this training and take this time off from wherever I was doing before, that it makes sense for me. There's a prize at the end of it. There's a history of people getting involved in these programs, sometimes paying to get trained, and then there's no job and they owe money. And so that fear has to be overcome. And one way to overcome that is that we'll guarantee you a job if you get through this program because we have all these employers who are ready to hire. So matching supply with demand in a reliable, transparent way was the gist of kind of the marketplace.
So what we have done now is we have almost 70 companies who are putting jobs on the table that pay living wages and above, don't require a 4-year degree. We have over 100 talent developers, as Charles was speaking of, many of whom are the ESEs that we're talking about today, organizations that can equip and recruit and upskill talent that we need to meet these demands. Obviously, we have Black talent without 4-year degrees. And then finally, to Charles's point, we have organizations that can provide wraparound supports, childcare, transportation, coaching, mentoring. Those are some of the main ones, mental wellness. And our job is to knit these together into a high functioning team and to scale it. We have two platforms or two approaches to that. We've got a technology marketplace that allows the matching to occur all virtually. Companies can publish jobs, talent can come on and see those jobs, talent developers can publish their offerings. And then we picked 25 cities around the country where we're trying to do this the old-fashioned way, build relationships on the ground that lead to the recruitment, the preparation, and the placement of folks into living wage jobs. That's the 110 journey. Charles, from your standpoint, if you had to pick one or two big challenges on this journey, what would you highlight for us?
Well, companies don't like to do things manually, so we need a high degree of automation for them to participate. When you have that type of scale, you can't do things in a spreadsheet anymore. And so they have these very complicated HR systems, and one component of that is something called the applicant tracking system. So when they get resumes in and people apply for jobs, it goes into the system. It ranks them. It basically apportions them by particular job roles and departments, and they can see who's there, and people can pick who they want to hire. It's kind of like their own internal marketplace. And so that's the way they're used to doing it. There are probably 5 or 6 major ones out there that they all use. They don't want to go to some separate system. So we have to integrate into those systems and make it seamless. And so as they have jobs and they upload them into their own HR system, they somehow appear on the 110 marketplace. So it has to be a two-way communication on status. So the complexity around the technology is one area, but we have a big technology team and they've been doing a great job. We're building all of that out as we speak. And then there's the AI platform as well to make sure that we're recommending the right person for the right job because we want people to be successful. But even if all that works, even if we place someone, then there's the retaining the people. And that's where a lot of other best practices come in. A lot of the HR managers now have a community of practice that Maurice formed for them so they can kind of compare notes. And one of the learnings is people tend to stick around longer if they're part of a cohort and they're not the only one. And so that's been proven in many different scenarios. I think someone discussed it earlier today. So we're coming up with techniques to make people feel part of the system, not alone, and then ongoing once they have the job, some interaction as well with the cohort. And so that's, learnings to be had going forward, but the companies realize that. So it's a focus. We're not just trying to place and say we're done. We want a career out of this.
Yeah, I would add this. At the end of the day, this is a mindset shift that we are attempting to advance and hopefully perpetuate, right? This skills first approach to hiring, skills first approach to promotion. What I see is our main currency, our main challenge, and our main opportunity is, and the most important ingredient to us knitting together and scaling this is actually trust, right? No matter how good the platform is, no matter how sophisticated our technology is, the question is, do the companies trust that we can find the talent for the jobs that they're putting on the table here? Do the talent developers trust that if they do the work, the ESCs trust that if they do the work and invest in the talent and get them prepared, that the companies will actually hire them and hire them at scale? And do the talent, does that individual Black talent without 4-year degrees trust that, yes, this company wants me, understands my value, this talent developer does want to help me improve my skills. If I do all this work, there's a job at the end that allows me to pay my bills, save money, go to school further if I desire. Trust is actually the main piece or the main ingredient that we will have to continue to try to earn every day in order for us to be successful at this venture. There's been so much in the way of broken trust and perceived broken trust. There's a lot of healing that needs to occur along this journey. And so we're hoping as the 110 enterprise to contribute to the earning of that trust every day and the building and the scaling of this journey. I know I got to turn it back over. Charles, any parting words before we go?
No, I couldn't have said it better on the trust, and we're working on that as we speak. I would note that there have been many federal programs for decades, and we spend something like $10 billion a year on this, and over 151 programs. And that's what they lack, was that trust, because they didn't have the jobs waiting on the other end, or they trained for the wrong skill set. And so that's why we're doing this privately. If we can integrate to some of those programs later, maybe that's a possibility, but you have to get the demand there, get the companies to have the jobs there. And now we got to go get the talent.
I want to thank the Federal Reserve. I want to thank David and Javier. I want to turn this back over to our teammates there and just say thank you. And last thing, 25,000 hires and promotions is what this group did in 110 from March to December of last year. This is doable. We just got to keep building. So thanks for letting Charles and I spend this time with you.
Thank you so much, Maurice and Charles. Thanks for being with us today. My name's Carrie McKellag. I'm the Chief Program Officer at REDF, and I'm the CEO of our Impact Loan Fund. We wanted to bring up a panel, so if I can ask the panelists to come up while we get organized. We have a great panel today. We have 2 social enterprise practitioners who are in the trenches doing the work. We're going to talk about it. And we have 2 funders who have been financing the work. Sure, go ahead and take a seat. I'm going to do some brief introductions and let them have a chance to speak about themselves. We might be missing a panelist. Alberto? Yeah, you can just grab a mic. Sit wherever you like. That's fine. Okay. So as I mentioned, we have 2 practitioners and maybe 2 funders, maybe 1. I'm also a funder, so I can wear both hats. But let me paint a picture of you for what we're talking about when we're talking about access to capital. These are businesses that we mentioned are competitive in the market. They provide goods and services. They have to do that at a competitive price. But they do that with a labor force that is transitional, that has to be invested in, and then leaves the business, and they do it all over again. So if you think about trying to run a small business, welcome, Alberto. Come on down, just in time. If you think about trying to run a small business as it is, and you add the complexity of a labor force which needs some help, and then leaves you as soon as they are trained up for the competitive labor force, that's what these small business owners are working on. So they are heroic, and we're going to introduce them all and get started. Hi. How are you? Hello, good. Come on down. Let's start with Dan and Amy, who are our social enterprise practitioners.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Dan Roten, Executive Director here at HopeWorks Camden. It's awesome to be in this group. Fundamentally at HopeWorks, what we do, like most social enterprises, young adults who are struggling with multiple obstacles walk in, often making less than $400 a year. Right now, when they walk out, they're making over $43,000 per year with an over 89% 12-month retention rate. We do that with technology, right? We train them in front-end web development, geographic information systems, digital mapping. We train them in those skills. We provide those services to companies as large as American Water and Comcast and as small as mid-sized companies all over the country. They get the experience, they build the portfolio, and then, you said it, they leave us. But not always. I'm really proud to say that right now, 30% of our full-time staff are alumni of our program because we hire the best. So it's really exciting to be here today, and I'm really excited to be with this crew.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Chasen. I am the CEO of Sweet Generation. We are a bakery based in Bushwick, Brooklyn. We just grew from a teeny tiny little hole-in-the-wall bakery in Manhattan to a giant warehouse space that houses a cafe, an event space, a huge production kitchen, and classrooms in order for us to run our youth job training program. We think of what we do as really creating a space, a supportive space for young people to learn, to grow, to discover themselves, to work, to learn what it means to work, and to grow. And we're really proud to be able to hire many of the young people that go through our program, and not only just hire them at entry level, but also advance them in our organization into senior leadership.
So for the funders here today, when you introduce yourselves, can you tell us a little bit about how your financial institutions came across social enterprises, and sort of what part of the financial institution is driving this interest in social enterprise? So maybe we'll start with Bank of America and Alberto.
Hey, so good afternoon. It's good to be here. Alberto Garofalo. I am the proud president of the great state of New Jersey for Bank of America. Longtime partner, Dan. It's great to see you. Great to meet you. I also am the chief CRA officer for Bank of America. I lead a series of responsibilities, and I've been with the firm for 19 years, and it's really great to be here. Now, did you have a question for me specifically, or do you want to go around first?
Maybe we'll get into that.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Michael Lohr. I'm a managing director in the Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group. We're a business that really provides capital to underserved communities across the U.S. And I've been on that team for over 11 years now, and I guess we'll get into the questions on how we got to that. But our team is really dedicated to deploying capital into underserved communities.
Great. So we're going to start with the social enterprises, and what I'd like Amy and Dan to talk about is how you think about different forms of capital when you think about growing what is a double bottom line business. You have certain expenses that can be covered with revenue and certain expenses that probably cannot. And so just how do you think about it when you think about funding your organization? Maybe start at the end.
Sure, yeah. I started this organization really bootstrapping it, raising money from my community, from my network, from friends, family, people that I met in my former career in youth development. And obviously that only goes so far. And so I really quickly realized that I needed to reach out to local banks to support this initiative, this program. And so I was really fortunate to be able to secure a small capital loan out the gate, just a $20,000 loan to be able to purchase equipment. A lot of that was because I had been able to, launch this crowdfunding campaign and tap into the network. That took us, just so far. And we realized very quickly, though our doors were open and we were selling cupcakes and coffee, that cupcakes and coffee don't quite pay enough to provide the supportive services necessary that young people that may not have had other work experience really need in order to continue their the support in their career development. And so we started to apply for grants. We were really fortunate to be awarded pretty early on a very large grant from the District Attorney's Office of New York, which helped fund our expansion to the Brooklyn location, and also helped us secure future loans both from banks, and then most recently we were able to secure a loan from REEF, which
we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan?
That's awesome, by the way. How we think of how we use different fundings is we kind of think, and again, we think employment social enterprises are great, but we really view employment social enterprises like HopeWorks, like Sweet Generations, as kind of the solution to the worst parts of philanthropic funding and a solution to the worst parts of market-based funding. Worst part about philanthropic funding, from what we see, is you can spend all this money and things don't change, right? Because too often with philanthropic interventions, there's not an end game, right? We're going to provide services, we're going to keep people where they are, we're going to keep them supported. They're going to need the same funding next year, right? All too often with market-based funding, right? Selling cupcakes, selling websites, it's fundamentally inequitable because the market is unbalanced, right? The competitive nature of market-based funding means you're always going to hire the best, most ready candidate that's the cheapest to onboard. The way it's designed is you're not going to look for candidates that are risky, and you shouldn't if you run a good business. Combining those two streams solve both problems. When we use philanthropic funding to provide all the supportive services, right? Number one, we eliminate the market-based concern. By the time our young adults at HopeWorks are finished, they have experience, they've worked with clients, they have exceptional skills, and a track record which removes the risk for the market-based hiring, and in fact makes them better because we can also make sure companies are hitting their DEI and social impact goals. Our candidates are actually a better bet by the time we're done. However, right, we can't provide those supportive services to get them there on market-based funding and pricing because that makes us non-competitive. Philanthropic dollars can cover that gap, and it's a great philanthropic investment because there's an end game. That young adult you're supporting now with career readiness coaching, finding housing, connecting to mental health, won't be on that dime a year from now because of employment social enterprise. And in fact, probably even faster because they're going to start earning money from our social enterprises before they're even done with us. So we really view that braided funding as the way to do it.
That's really interesting. Thank you. So for Alberto and for Mike, what were the investment decisions at your firms to get you into this space? Is this really through the kind of philanthropic side? Is this about business development in some market? Were there certain geographies or the fact that these certain target populations was what brought you to the table? And then do you think about it differently than you think about just funding non-traditional nonprofits? Do you think uniquely about the social enterprise model, or, how does it compare?
Well, I mean, I guess to start, so, our business, the Urban Investment Group, is really, as I noted before, focused on deploying capital in low-income and underserved communities across the U.S. And so that takes a variety of different forms. We focus on the built environment, providing housing and essential services like places to get, grocery and food and the like, but also focus on education and as well as the businesses that are in those communities. And so Goldman Sachs as an organization has a variety of different pockets of capital that are designed and thinking around some of these components. We have our 10,000 Small Business Initiative, which is really designed to provide both education services and access to capital to small businesses across the U.S. We also have our Launch with GS program, which is really designed to provide capital and services to entrepreneurs and fund managers. And then we also have our 1 Million Black Women Initiative, which is really designed to provide capital at various stages of a Black woman's life with different access to capital, different services and the like. And so when we think about our investment, it spans across all those things, but it also spans across just the traditional kind of CRA investing that we do as well. And so the way we try to think about it is, our investing and what we're doing is really just part of our natural DNA. And so if you're deploying capital at scale and being very direct about what that's doing, you can create impact across a variety of different things. And so when I think about some of the things we do on the built environment side, that creates jobs. And how are you thinking about different job training opportunities? If you're working on a public housing project, are you making sure that there's jobs actually being created in that housing project itself? Black Power, who was supposed to be here today, but Danelle just had a baby, so he couldn't. They are really addressing a need in terms of an aging building stock across the entire U.S., particularly here in New York, many of which are in low-income communities and are being overlooked in terms of the clean energy. And so they're really looking to address that problem, but then coupling that with creating jobs for the people that are living in those communities. And so that was one of the things that was compelling to us. And so I'd say it's really more about being very intentional about the investment decisions that you're making and thinking about what those impacts are, but then trying to couple that with sometimes philanthropic support, sometimes city capital, sometimes other forms of capital to really create a dynamic investment that really is both investable, which we think helps scale it, but also provides the impacts that are important to those communities and to the public sector.
Thank you. Look, for us, this is core to who we are. It's core to our strategy, and it is deeply embedded in our philanthropic strategy and our giving. But it's also deeply connected to our overall strategy of driving responsible growth, which is really about driving shareholder value, client value, and ultimately value for the community. I think secondly, it's also one that, although is broad and national, and I'll talk about some examples of that, it's also a very localized strategy. So myself, I'm the president for the state of New Jersey, and there's 93 markets like me that represent essentially across the country. So to your point about geography, we're not only looking at across the enterprise, but what are the local needs specifically? And yes, we're investing in historically Black colleges and universities, in Hispanic serving institutions, but we're also investing in social enterprises locally where the needs are actually happening and where they matter most. And then third, this is what we call the genius of the and. This strategy allows us to, as I shared earlier, drive shareholder value, drive client and impact locally, impact the communities, but also impact society at large in addressing this very needs, which frankly, allows us, Dan and I have had a partnership since 2000, I think it was, where we not only partnered with the organization, but in addition to the philanthropy and to the dollars, we also have a vested interest. So our strategy is, yes, we're going to go and invest, but we're also going to take our leadership and our volunteerism and invest in the infrastructure of the organization. We have an emerging leader program. We have an executive director program. And that's all part of this sort of broad commitment to, yes, we're going to continue to invest, but we're also going to take our leadership capital and partner with these organizations so they can maximize that success.
Great, thank you. That's and we can get into more examples as well, because I think it really kind of brings the point home. I'd like to talk about what's missing and what we could do more. I think we can talk about different forms of capital. There's philanthropic dollars that have been deployed here. There are debt dollars and there are equity dollars in Goldman's investment in Block Power. And those are different channels. But there is still a lack of finance that's coming into the social enterprise sector. And what most people will tell you is that it's a complicated, it's a small business, so you're essentially underwriting a small business, which is already relatively risky just given the nature of small business. But when you add on top of it the complexities that we talked about, often there's not a lot of fixed assets. Often there's not a lot of collateral. Often there's a lot of seasonality in the work and in the revenue. So rather than tell you how challenging it is, I will just say, like, finance is a very creative place, and you as financiers know that it can get really creative. And I think what is potentially missing is bringing some of that creativity into how to underwrite and finance the growth of these businesses. So I would like to hear from the entrepreneurs themselves. If you had a magic wand, what is sort of the key piece of capital or of the way that finance could come in to grow your business that you would really benefit from and you would want this audience to hear about?
I think if we had that magic wand, and if you have it, I'll stay after. I think the key thing for HopeWorks and organizations like us is it is important to be clear what you're paying for. And what I mean by that is if with philanthropic or investment dollars, you are demanding extensive process, that's what you're asking for to acquire that, you will get process. You will get theories of change, you will get flowcharts, you will get all of those things. If you want, return on investment, that's okay. That's kind of like how the thing works. It's important to be clear on that and be clear on what the return you expect is and what the differential is. What's the delta between just a high value return on investment? If your key thing is outcomes, you're going to ask for different things from the HopeWorks of the world than if you're only looking for process. I go to the best burger joint in the world. I pay for the burger, not to watch the guy do it, right? Now, the truth is, of course, we know this, actually most investors are looking for all three, right? And that's reasonable. What is difficult is when a person like HopeWorks has to guess what's your top two. Transparency about what portion of your investment you're looking for return on, what portion is outcomes, and what portion is that process can, number one, make sure that someone like me can say, we're a good bet for you, right? Because that's the worst case scenario for us is when we attract investment, whether philanthropic or otherwise, where our set goals are different than the investors, right? And then the second thing is it allows us to say, if we're not a good bet, we can find someone who is, right? There's a place for your dollars. And if you don't know where it is, we probably do, right? But I think being clear about what exactly the return is it outcomes? Is it process? Is it monetary return? And where do those three things fit? Then we can really rock and roll.
And in full disclosure, Amy just went through a process with the REDF Impact Investing Fund of closing a loan. So I'm sure she has lots of suggestions that she could offer on that, and we're very willing to hear.
It was actually such a positive experience, especially having gone through a traditional bank loan. process, what made it different was that it was not just black and white numbers on paper. It was really talking about what do we do, what are our goals, what are the things that REDF was interested in seeing in terms of impact. What do we picture our future to look like? How are we going to get there? What happens if this doesn't go through? What happens if we have Omicron times 11? What happens in these real life scenarios? I think, right now we're facing that big grant that we got. It was over $2 million as a tiny organization that funded us for 3 years. So when I look back at last year, we had like $750,000 of basically free money, right? Money that we don't have to pay back, money that was there to help us grow and sustain us. And now we're falling off a cliff. Now we have $200,000 this year. And so how do we fill that gap? What do we do? And so part of our strategy has been looking for investors, looking for loans that support what we're doing, understand what we're doing beyond just the black and white numbers on paper, because they don't always look as good as a traditional business might look, because we spend more money on staff, we spend more money on labor, we spend more money on supporting our team. And so, when I think about what's missing, it's the consistency of support, it's the reinvestment when an investment has already been made, and whether that's actual dollars or investment in helping the social enterprises find new money, find new access to sustainability. That's, I think, what's really critical in this sector.
Point taken. Thank you. And Mike, can you talk a little bit about there's a discussion about shareholder capital, stakeholder capital, valuing different people's perspectives in underwriting and investment, and just how when you made your investment in Block Power, how that evolved and how your thinking on that evolved as it went?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of different types of capital that we provide, but if focusing on the Block Power example, we did two things. First, we made an investment in the company, and second, we provided a loan facility to basically finance projects that they're doing. I think about them in two different ways. The first was, and thinking about from the business owner standpoint, you have to think about what capital is right for you. And work with your capital providers to understand kind of what each piece means. And so if I think about the Block Power case, like they have a very compelling market thesis on how they're going to address the fact that you have an aging housing stock that's basically energy inefficient. And so when you think about just the opportunity set at large, it's massive. So when we think about just an opportunity in an investment in the company, if they're able to address even just a small segment of that market, there's a huge market share opportunity. But really what was interesting about it from the social enterprise standpoint is they actually have a really direct investing thesis in terms of deploying capital into those underserved neighborhoods, providing jobs and providing basically services to people. And so that's one part of the equation that not everyone looks for. And some people, quite frankly, are scared of that, right? So they don't really understand exactly what that means. They don't want to spend the time on it. And if you're really deploying capital into these neighborhoods, there's in many cases not a lot of data, right? So you can look across, the entire, country and look at data on people that have solar leases and the like and see default rates that doesn't exist in these neighborhoods. And so how do you draw that parallel and comparison is very, quite frankly, hard to do, but also not that hard to understand. If we look across our portfolio, have massive investments in affordable housing projects. So if you're doing energy efficiency retrofits in those buildings, you shouldn't feel that uncomfortable that those are also going to be repaid. And so that's really the kind of thesis into the lending opportunity was, let's provide some necessary capital for the business to run its operations, as you noted, and give the necessary infrastructure. But that only goes so far if you don't have the capital to scale your actual business growth. And so we thought about the opportunity of how can you actually help fund those project finance and those opportunities to scale the business opportunity while providing, alongside other investors in the company, the necessary infrastructure.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And maybe for all panelists, we've talked a little bit about the impact of the work and how we think about the impact that's generated. But for Amy and Dan, how do you really talk about your work? How do you measure the impact of your work, and how do you talk about it with funders? And then from the funder perspective, what is it that you're most interested in understanding about the impact?
For us, like I said at the beginning, like that's the whole thing. You know, it's what's the delta on income? Are folks moving from not working, no income, or into living wage jobs? That number is garbage if they don't keep it, right? So that's the second one. And our research, and I think that it says, if you hold a job for at least 12 months, you're kind of in the workforce then. Does that make sense? You might get promoted, you might go up, but like you're going to be, for our folks, right? And that means like, our delta is about $40,000 in 1 year for one candidate, right? If we place 100 folks, I'm very aware of doing math in my head in this audience, by the way, right? But that's pretty good, right? And then if they keep it, right? So, your turn. So like, about 90% are still going to be working a year later. So that means that's your second year, right? So that's the thing. Does that make sense? And for us, there's lots of metrics that you can use to like see if you're on track to do that. But kind of like if I'm driving to LA, how do I know I did it? Is when I arrive to LA. The metrics that I have in the meantime are, did I make it to Ohio? Am I in Oklahoma? But like, I can't report out and say, hey, we 10 people made it to Ohio. That means 0 folks are in LA. That's a weird analogy. Does that make sense? But the point is, sometimes it's really simple, right? It's how many folks got jobs? What were their wages? What's the delta, right? And then are they still working 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later? Like that's, for us, is the thing.
Yeah, at Sweet Generation, we really focus a lot, in terms of impact, we focus a lot on the perceived value that participants have in the program. What do they take away from it? What do they walk away feeling like they gain from participating in our program? Our staffing model now, over 85% of our entire staff, including senior leadership, are former participants in our program. And so we feel like that is a great signal of satisfaction in employment and success in our program. And so for us now, we're trying to figure out how we translate that out to funders, because we're really focused. We're stepping in. We think of it as a preventative approach. So we work with some organizations that work with formerly incarcerated youth, but the vast majority of the programs that we work with are just working with young people that happen to live in low-income communities. And so we're really thinking about, this is just, for many of them, just their first job. What was it like for us to have our first job? And what was it like to have a first job that was really supportive? And how can we give them that support, that feedback, and that mentorship so that they come out of it, whether they stay with us or they move on to become a banker? How do they feel about the experience that they had? How confident do they feel coming out? What can they reflect on in terms of what they're taking away from this opportunity?
Great, yeah.
Yeah, so look, in terms of measurement, a lot of what Amy and Dan were saying is really spot on, and is also one of the many ways that we ultimately look at it. But for us, we look at it through a sort of three-prong approach or lens, right? What's the impact to the key stakeholders, to the communities, to the associates, and ultimately society? And obviously, we have a qualitative and quantitative approach that not only allows us to meet the highest standards in terms of policy, regulation, and requirements, but our own sort of standards in terms of what we do and what we give. Of course, we've got traditional key performance indicators, jobs retained, wages, impact, your traditional sort of metrics and scorecard-driven approach. Of course, we have all of that, but one of the most important ways is what Dan was ultimately talking about. We partner very, very closely with the organization, and we're part of the success. So we have visibility, right? Like I know for a fact that 99% of all of the young adults that go in are making $400 or less. How do I know that? Because I'm vested in that organization. I understand it. I also know that as an outcome of that, those on the other side are making $43,000 or more on average. How do I know that? Because that's part of the process that we measure. We are part of the solution, but we're also measuring it alongside, and those are the impacts that we're also interested in. And there's other examples, right? So we partnered, and this is locally in New Jersey, we partnered with the African American Chamber of Commerce. We gave them $100,000 for an ex-offender program. So not only did we give them that funding, but then we sent all of our resources, and we're doing financial literacy. We're doing education. And we're seeing the impact real time that it's having to the potential that these ex-offenders are not going to have to go enter the workforce. And by the way, we're also part of the solution because we're on the other end. Once they finish the program, we have the ability to place them into jobs. And we've got commitments to place them into jobs. So, yes, it's your traditional sort of KPIs, quantitative and quantitative approach, but it's also working very, very closely with the organization to make sure that they're successful.
Yeah, I mean, look, measuring the impact is really, I think everyone said a lot of that here, so I'm not going to repeat it all, but there's a lot of different ways to measure it, and I think on top of just trying to collect the data and thinking about how the breadth of all the things you're doing, it's also really important to think about some of the case studies and things that worked, and then try to replicate that. And so being a part of the investments, as Alberto noted, like actually being on the ground and understanding what's happening there allows you to report back on what you did, but also think about ways that you could leverage that and scale that and do that in other places. And speaking for Danelle at Block Power, one of the things that they're working on is a workforce initiative where they're literally training people who are incarcerated to do the work that they're doing. And what they find valuable to that is it provides a resume opportunity. It shows that you had a job, and then their best outcome for them, although they'd like to maybe retain some of those people, is that they actually get jobs with the contractors that they're working with. And so that's a measure of impact if I think about a specific example. And so it's really being intentional about some of the things that you want to do, but then learning from those and trying to scale that.
So we are trying to figure out in our own lending practice what is real repayment risk and what is perceived risk and what is bias that is just baked into finance underwriting, period, right? And we're finding that challenging, one, because there is an absence of alternative ways to measure risk that don't have maybe some of those biases baked in. But we also are an intermediary. We have funders. And so we are also worried and thinking about who we're reporting to while we're trying to innovate. And maybe I'll put Alberto on the spot a little bit as the CRA officer of a bank. Are there policy level changes or sort of big picture CRA level things that would incentivize lenders to be more risk taking in the sense of like trying to prove that a social enterprise can repay and not kind of taking for granted or just assuming some of the metrics about liquidity and access to capital are the reason why you should not lend to somebody? Are there any kind of lessons we should be maybe, we can pilot things at a little level, but things at the big level you see?
Yeah, so look, I think it goes back to the point I stated earlier. This is at the core and at the fabric of our responsible growth strategy. And when it starts, with the CEO, when it starts at the core foundation of your philanthropic strategy, that this is part of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, the CRA credit and eligibility becomes an after fact that happens. And if you look at the history of CRA ratings and performance, ours has certainly been outstanding. We're actually right now in the middle of an exam for this 17 to 20 year cycle. So we're spending a lot of time talking about the outcomes. And I think my advice would be, it's a two-way street. There has to be an extreme level of transparency between the funders and the lenders and the organizations to understand each other, to educate and provide awareness. And when that happens at the ground level and organically, then you're able to make partnerships like ours work and many others, where you're driving significant benefit to the organizations that are focused on these most underserved communities. You're impacting society. You're impacting the employees. You're bringing the talent into your organization. You're solving the wealth gap, and you're also getting CRA credit for it. So it's at the tail end of that. It's not the reason why we did it, but it's embedded into the culture, and that is really important. And it's about organizational strategy. And for us, that's very core to who we are.
Comment on policy changes?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to comment on policy changes, but I would say that, kind of piggybacking off that a little bit, the business that we're in, it's it's profitable, right? This isn't philanthropy at its core. I mean, there are other sources of capital for that, but when banks are doing this, they're doing this because, one, it makes sense. There is an investable opportunity set, and it drives impact, and which has a ripple effect. And so, there are certainly things that are going on in terms of at least financial institutions where we're held to certain regulatory environment, and there are things that we need to think about. Some of which have helped to make those investments and incentivize those with different ways to think about capital and the like. But broadly, I think it's about really figuring out ways to pair public and private capital and philanthropy to make an investable opportunity set. And so there's certainly been policy changes to help with that. There are things that have driven at least making it easier for banks to do certain things, to hold things longer, to implement changes, all of which are net beneficial. But it's really also just making sure that these opportunities can be profitable and that you're incentivized to invest in them.
I'm going to give the last word to our social enterprises to just sort of sketch out where your vision is, like where you guys are going over the next few years, and where capital, again, blue sky, ideal sources of capital and combinations of capital that would help you get there. And we may have some time for Q&A from the audience, so we'll open that up.
For us, kind of like how we kind of summarize this moment for us is kind of like our foot is in the door and we want to kick the door down. And what I mean by that is every company that used to tell us that we prefer bachelors or maybe we'd like, right? Companies are ready, right? And not only that, maybe the market driven is the reason they've come to us at first. Our folks are killing it. And then they're coming back, right? And so that means that our biggest operational risk, right, is we want to meet that need now when the market wind is at our backs, so that when there's a contraction and there's an option to go back to the bad old days, why would you? So that's what we're trying to do in our market, right? We're trying to scale, we're trying to meet the employer demand, we're trying to meet our business demand. And so I'm thinking about you with growing, as we're opening additional locations, right? We're trying to get more space so we can do more. Timing is important, right? If we can build these pipelines with multiple companies now, when it's the time when the business case is so dramatically and abundantly clear, we can do that now and do a good job, which we will, right? I'm clearly biased, but we'll do great, right? Then building a diverse, inclusive workforce is not the thing you're doing for the credit. It's part of the process now. It's how we do things. And when there's a contraction, when times are tough, why would you do things the bad way when the way you're doing it now is so much better? That's what we're trying to do in this moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, going through this expansion, there's so much on the horizon for us at Sweet Generation, and we're really thinking about our business growth, our organizational growth, as exponential opportunity to employ a significant number of young people in our enterprise. And whether or not they stay with us is, of course we want the best of the best to stay with us forever and ever, but better than that is to send them out in the world to pursue whatever unique interest they might have, and do it with the foundation that they've created while being at Sweet Generation. And so over the next few years, our growth, we look at it internally as a means of sending out the young people that come through our organization, sending them out in the world, to get that next level job that they likely would not have gotten if they didn't have an experience with us.
If I may, and I think Amy and Dan will appreciate it. It goes back to your question about the overcoming the risk biases and, frankly, the need for more innovation. I don't know about you, right? But I won't tell you how old I am, but I was born in the 70s. You can do the math, and I don't remember a time in history where there's been a more important time for organizations like ours and others to innovate and do more to support the investing in organizations like this. The need has never been greater as far as I'm concerned. And because of that, we think we need to go beyond the norm and sort of the traditional approach and really sort of think about ways to innovate. A few examples that demonstrate that, so it's not just words, it's sort of meaningful, right? So we've announced a $1.25 billion commitment over the next 5 years to address social inequality and social economic challenges. As part of that, we've already allocated $200 million to minority-focused organizations like this that you see here on stage. Secondly, we have programs that we've innovated, like the Neighborhood Builders program, which you're also a prior recipient of it, where you provide, funds directly, unrestricted, that the organization can use, and then in addition to that, you provide leadership capital to train their emerging leaders and executive directors to maximize the impact. And the last point I'll make is, look, we understand that traditionally there are times where financial institutions like ours may not be a fit. How do you innovate? How do you solve for that? We're the largest investor in community development financial institutions. We have a portfolio of about $1.6 billion, and we invest directly into over 250 community development financial institutions. So when we can't, we invest in organizations that can, and it's an innovative way for us to provide access to that. As a matter of fact, we built a national directory of that, so that way we can educate and create awareness so that organizations, when traditional financial institutions can't provide, you have access to that, and we continue this commitment, whether directly or indirectly.
Yeah, no, I think you just asked me to just talk a little bit about kind of the future for our business, and I think a lot of that resonates here as well. I mean, for us, we were looking at kind of the things we've done, and I kind of noted this in my opening remarks. It's about being intentional, and so like we look back and saw, wow, we've actually invested a lot in minority developers who are investing in real estate, but how can we actually be more intentional about that? And so we definitely have initiatives focused around how can you actually be really thoughtful about investing in those businesses. I noted earlier on about the firm's 1 Million Black Women Initiative, which is a 10-year $10 billion initiative, and we've already invested close to $1 billion of that. And that's not just us, that's firm-wide. So I think that, when I think about the opportunity set in front of us, there's a lot of things that have happened, for better or worse, particularly, in the midst of the pandemic. But what's come out of that is a lot of people being really thoughtful about how to drive change and how do you use dollars and how do you think about that. And so I think one thing for us is just continuing to do what we've always done, but be more intentional about those investments, working with Block Power to create initiatives to have workforce training and workforce development, thinking about other businesses that could benefit from that as well, and really just thinking about how you get innovative with those dollars and how you find the right programs and right ways to deploy capital into really important and impactful initiatives.
Great. I want to thank my panelists and give them a quick round of applause, and we'll open it up for some questions. Thank you very much. Absolutely.
Hi. Hi, I'm Oscar Perriabella with Next City. I'm curious about, this past 2 years have been a very unique time for everyone. So I'd love to hear what it's been like for all of you. For the ESCs, was there an initial huge influx of applicants coming to your programs in spring 2020? And also, maybe even more importantly, over the past year, has it been easier to place folks? Is it getting harder to keep folks? Are the folks who are alumni, are they getting higher starting salaries as a result of these tight labor markets we've seen over the past year? And for the bankers or the investors on the panel, over the past year, I'm curious if you're having other colleagues in other parts of your organizations, just small business loan officers, perhaps someone working on Union County, New Jersey, or Trenton, or Camden, or wherever, saying, "Hey, look, I've got a restaurant. I'm really worried they're not going to repay this loan. Can you help me help them find a workforce employment social enterprise kind of partner to help them staff up so they can repay this loan that I just made?"
You want me to start with it's a great question. And I'll go back to the point that I made earlier. A part of what's really important to us is not only is it a national embedded strategy, a lot of what we were talking about, but it's also a very local strategy. So I think to your point specifically, yes, we do that. And I'll show you, and I'll give you an example of how we do that. We have a process that's called a community needs assessment process, where my team, and this is happening, by the way, nationally. I'm giving you the example of New Jersey, of what you talked about in Camden and some of these other areas, which I know very well. We meet with all of the key influencers, all of the major nonprofits and or organizations that we either partner with or that are prominent in those communities. And we have what's called a community needs assessment. What are the needs? What's changing? What are the most pressing needs? We align that locally. And then that ultimately determines what my local philanthropy strategy is ultimately going to be. So if things have shifted and there is a need for more qualified candidates or better financial literacy programs, we're going to pivot. We're going to invest in those areas and or partner with organizations so that we can deploy capital and to organizations or point them in the right direction where they can get access to the very areas that they're telling us is the most pressing need. And again, it becomes a really sort of repeatable process that allows us to be very nimble year over year. Because there is some consistency. There are some things that come back and emerge. But obviously what we saw over the last 2 years has been unprecedented. It allowed us to react to that. Food insecurities is a perfect example. Right? They were exacerbated by the pandemic. As a result of that, we went in and dramatically increased the giving that we provided to food services. The Food Bank of New Jersey is one example of that that we've done. That was as a result of that program. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think that was a great question, by the way. I think kind of three things that we saw. The first thing is, somebody said this, and it's true, the whole rising tide lifts all boats only works if you're in the pool. And what we found is our young adults returning from incarceration, experiencing homelessness, they are not connected to the economy, which means that when times are really, really good, times are rough for them. When times are really, really bad, times are rough for them. And that we saw that pattern happen more. Does that make sense? That's the bad news. The good news is we are seeing dramatic changes. First, we're in tech, right? Our young adults can work remotely, and often transportation and where they work has a big barrier. It's been bonanzas. We actually quickly pivoted and we built a co-working space right next to our training space for our alumni so they can work and have good internet, have their little office, have their phone booth. It is packed, right? Wages are going up, right, for sure, especially in tech and especially those entry-level tech positions where our folks hit. The other thing that we are definitely seeing is for our social enterprises, right? The combination of really good web development, geographic information system, all that, and the ability to have demonstrated social impact, that's a winning formula for us, especially now. So we've seen a massive thing for opportunity, and I said it before, our biggest operational risk is we want to make sure that all this stuff is in cement, before the environment changes, right? So that's been our experience so far.
Yeah, we're in food service, so it probably goes without saying COVID devastated us. I mean, it destroyed us solidly for a long time, and we are clawing our way back and trying. When we signed our lease in Brooklyn in February 2020. So I'll let you fill in the gaps of what happened over the next 2 years. And so we're now in a position, we opened a year ago in Brooklyn, but at 20% capacity. We can have 130 people in our space. It's a big space. We could only have 20% of that for many months. We couldn't do any events. We couldn't do any of the services that we had planned on doing. And so now that things are starting to open up and young people are starting to come back into the community-based organizations that we partner with, and we're able to run our internship on site again, this is why it was so critical for us at this moment to partner with REDF to get an additional investment to recover from what truly devastated us, because there is so much potential on the horizon, especially as our industry rebuilds itself.
And I think we have some more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Mary Bogle from the Urban Institute. Doing that math in my head while you guys are talking. A lot of the way I think of in my work with community level metrics and metrics with disinvested neighborhoods is looking at scale as population level impact. That to me is social impact. Very impressive program level impact being reported here for graduates retaining in jobs, 90%, right? But that is far from population level impact in terms of entire communities, who's the outreach pool, who actually enrolls, who graduates. So the denominator matters. And what I wonder about is, how do you get to scale without public systems putting into this capital stack? Because even the impressive amounts of money you're talking about are nothing compared to WIOA dollars coming down through mayors and governors. So I heard one speaker who I was very impressed with earlier kind of brush off the public systems, but I wonder if that's really feasible. Can we afford to brush off the public systems? And how do you all think about capital flows from the public sector, especially investing in that human capital piece? That film, one of the themes running through it earlier was the amount of housing problems people had. And you looked at the housing people were in, it was hard to imagine how they could be stable in their well-being and retain jobs given the failures of the public sector in providing decent housing space.
I'll start, and while the rest of you can, that's a good question. It's a hard question. Yeah. So social enterprise originally was created because of a market failure, right? This was like an employment model that the traditional workforce system wasn't servicing, and that's why these largely private, market-based solutions came about. Which I think, a lot of us are attracted to this work because it imposes some of the discipline of the market on something which generates social impact. That's great. But over time, I think we've seen there is a role for public finance in a social enterprise. There's sort of two pots that, as an intermediary, we've identified that are a good fit. One is USDA has employment and training dollars for people who are on food stamps, the objective being to get off of food stamps and into a job. The things that they pay for are exactly the things that social enterprises are doing. They're training, they're building up skills. So when there's a source of public money that is well suited to the intervention, yeah, it should be part of the capital stack. I think the second pot of money that you would think is the right one is WIOA, right? These are Department of Labor dollars for workforce training. They have not proven to be particularly, I'm gonna let them use whatever adjective they want, suited to this intervention. And so there's a mismatch there, and that's where I think the policy conversation can go.
Yeah, just to start on that, I think it's really how you work to pair them together, right? And in certain instances, especially a lot of things we worked on, you noted housing. I mean, we do a lot of large-scale housing projects, both of which have private dollars and public sector dollars, and they're complicated, and there's a lot of complexity behind them, but there's massive gaps in these projects given the capital needs. You see what the capital needs that NYCHA has. You see all these, very necessary affordable housing projects, which just can't support the cash flow needed for the cost to build it. And so there's certainly a place for philanthropy or public sector dollars and what have you to where we come in is to leverage those dollars and to make these projects, ultimately feasible and but partnering with them to make sure that they're designing the impact that you have. I think there's other places where, as I noted with the kind of data problem and people just having a perceived perception of risk, sometimes, unfortunately, they can be, people just won't invest in them until there's the data behind it. And so I think in some cases you can use that to provide subsidy or some risk mitigant, stop loss or what have you, to help create these pilot programs or to help them get to scale. I think if you start to do these and see the data and the impacts of them, hopefully 5-10 years down the line, you actually have an opportunity set where you don't need those dollars. So I think it's always, in my opinion, going to be a part of the equation. But just having their limited capital sources, right? And so you have to figure out the best way to leverage those to create as much impact as possible while being cognizant of the population problem. I think that there's going to always be a constant need, and so there's a limited resource. You got to use that resource as best as possible.
I think it's a great question, and I'm not sure I'll give you the solution, but I'll give you a perspective, perhaps, of how we're sort of thinking about it. And it starts with a really diversified approach to, I think, the complicated needs that you alluded to. So when you think about our $1.25 billion strategy, it's multi-pronged. It's not one area of focus, it's multiple areas of focus. So, part of that investment is around workforce development, social enterprise is a lot of what we're talking about here. That's one approach. But you also have other areas. You've got healthcare that we're looking into invest in and continue to do more in. You've got small businesses which have very, very specific needs that were also exacerbated by the pandemic. And then you've got, of course, affordable housing. And there's lots of examples of the amount of investments that were sort of leading the pack in terms of affordable housing and the impact that that's having. We're going to do that because that's core to our strategy, and I said it earlier, it's part of our responsible growth strategy. But what we're also trying to do is we're trying to go out there and give really specific examples so that others can join and align. It is my belief that if we align around this common purpose, private and public, then you start to potentially have the impact at scale. So one example that I can give you, right, is, we have a very specific jobs initiative where we are partnering with either historically black colleges, university, Hispanic serving institutions, social enterprises, collectively, and we're saying, hey, what is the actual workforce need in terms of the jobs that we think we're going to need 3, 5, 10 years from now? Your lens, our lens. And then we say, okay, what are the skill sets that we need to train to go and be able to equip, individuals in low to moderate income areas to be able to be skilled at these roles? And we're partnering with organizations to now not only investing in organizations, right? So we've given significant amount of dollars to organizations like this and other universities to help us build the curriculum, but we're also part of it. We're helping build the curriculum for the jobs that we're going to hire to, and oh, by the way, we're going to commit to hiring them. And if you think about that, and you start to share that in the private and public sector as a commitment that we're doing and invite others to join, then I think we have a potential to align around a common purpose and a common vision to then at scale make the impact. We're going to do it irrespective, and we're inviting others to do more.
Last word to Dan, and then.
No. I would just say two quick things. First, I would say the description of WIOA as not well suited to the task is an exceedingly generous description of WIOA. And I would actually gently say that workforce development programs' addiction to WIOA money is one reason why workforce development in communities has such a horrific reputation. So I'll go on at length with that later if you're interested. I think the second thing I would gently push is scaling for effectiveness does not mean one program has to do it all. It means using the right tool for the job. For example, what HopeWorks does and social enterprises do, I say our specialty is we take folks who are not engaged in the economic system and we pull them in to living wage jobs, stability, stuff. Once that's done, they are vulnerable to the policy level changes that can really make change. Earned income child tax credit, right? We saw during the pandemic, one policy change in that, massive levels of poverty changed. You know who it didn't help? Folks who don't file taxes, right? Folks who don't have the paperwork. Folks, that's us. Does that make sense? So I would say the tool of social enterprises like HopeWorks is to take folks who are not in the system, earning illicit income, right? Sex work, drug trafficking, right? All those things, all those ways people have, bring them into living wage jobs where suddenly they can take advantage of tax credits, right? Policy can actually then have a meaningful impact on poverty because everybody's in the pool, and I think that's the tool that like the HopeWorks of the world can do.
So there's some products in the foyer from Sweet Generation, and if you have website design needs and other social media, HopeWorks in Camden. Thank you so much to the panel.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
All right. So for our final panel, I'd like to introduce Sung Kim. She's the Senior Vice President and leads the national programs at LISC, and Brenda Palms Barber. She's President and CEO of North Lawndale Employment Network, and they have a social enterprise called Sweet Beginnings, which we're going to hear a lot about. They're going to join us virtually from Chicago. So Sung and Brenda.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. Thanks, Javier. I also want to thank both David, Javier at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York City, as well as Maria, Carla, and the team at REDF for convening this very important discussion today around employment opportunities through social enterprises. And we are actually on location at the home of Sweet Beginnings in Chicago, and we're really thrilled that we can join the conversation today virtually. As Javier mentioned, my name is Sun Kim. I'm a Senior Vice President for National Programs at LISC. This is Brenda Palms-Barber, a longtime friend and partner in the work, President CEO of North Lawndale Employment Network, and we're going to hear actually about two of the social enterprises that very successful social enterprises that she's operating today. I also want to talk a little bit about LISC. We're a community development financial institution and an intermediary nonprofit that operates through our local offices and our rural partners all across the nation. And we provide loan capital as well as grant support and technical assistance program strategy to partners on the ground who have a shared mission and interest that we do to see our communities thrive. What we do is we learn from our partners like Brenda. We have an ear to the ground, and we learn also where we can fill in the gaps and where we can do better as well, so that we can try to drive real transformation in our communities. And so in a minute, you're going to hear more from Brenda. We've been asked to provide a field perspective on the role of capital and social enterprises and how they boost employment opportunities and wealth in our communities. But before we do, I'm actually going to turn it over back to Javier to play a brief video that we provided for everyone.
Lomborg is set again. Here is a pop fly into shallow center field. They're coming on. It's going to drop. Run.
I love baseball. That was my year round. I played baseball season, meeting people, going places, away from all the other stuff that was going on in the neighborhood.
The pitch. Here is a drive, but it's going to curve and go foul down the left field.
Darren, he did pretty well in high school. He won all types of awards, and he was picked by the Atlanta Braves to pitch for them. Of course, a situation happened that took 30 years out of his life.
Being in the wrong place at the wrong time and not thinking, everything that you had built, everything that you wanted was gone. When I left, it was the 80s. So I missed the 90s, 2000, 2010, when it was time to get released. Now, how do I get from the 80s to 2019 or 2020? What did for me is the U-turn permitted program. I just told them, I don't know how to use a phone, I don't know how to do a computer. They were like, no problem, we can help you. They put me in the right mind space and head space, and they gave me opportunity to go at my own pace and do things that I need to do, and they helped me.
When he first got home, he was isolated. He had an air about him where you really didn't want to talk to him. But then when he graduated, the change was dramatic.
Oh, that was a good experience because after I graduated from U-turn permitted, I had an opportunity. It was a transitional job, 90-day job.
Sweet Beginnings is a social enterprise. It is part of North Lawndale Employment Network, and it serves as a way for any of our clients who come through U-turn permitted to actually get really, really good marketable skills.
That was a good day. Knowing that I was going to work, I was like, man, I'm finna go to work. I was so ready to work, I was there early.
He'll make the product. He'll make sure the label's correct. I know Darren got it. He has a wonderful mindset. He want to do things. He want to build things. He continue to grow.
I was optimistic about hiring Darren, and Darren could articulate the skill set. Like, he talked about the customer service he learned at Sweet Beginnings that he could bring to 40 Acres.
By him right now working 2 jobs, right, he is definitely productive.
I just enjoy what I do. I try to, do the best that I can every day.
But he's also a giver. Darren has made a donation to North Lawndale Employment Network, so he is officially a donor of ours.
I want to give back to them the way they gave to me. What North Lawndale do is give you a chance and an opportunity to prove that what people see and say is not true. I'm proud of myself, and I feel that I got a lot more to give. For me, it's good to receive this award of recognition I want people to understand that I'm out here trying to do good. I want to be part of the solution.
Glad y'all were able to join us and listen a little bit about Darren's story. But there's more. There's more to his story. If we can get the slide up, that would be great. It's important for you all to know not only is Darren a donor, someone that is a graduate of our U-Turn Permitted Job Readiness Program, an employee of Sweet Beginnings, currently still working at his job with just lost the name.
40 acres.
40 acres, thank you. But he recently purchased a home right before Christmas. And he is an example of how our Financial Opportunities Center, in partnership with LISC, how a social enterprise have come together to create an incredible pathway forward for an individual who has served 30 plus years behind bars in prison. And so today, he's a homeowner. He had Christmas with his family. His children came to visit. And he's just one of so many that are benefiting from the social enterprise and reentry workforce development model that we have at NOE.
Wonderful, Brenda. This is really amazing. I really appreciate this opportunity to come and to see your new space. I think when I first met Brenda back in 2006, she was doing amazing work out of a little house on Flournoy Avenue in Chicago. And I was just blown away when I drove up to this amazing new facility, which not only houses all of their employment training programs, but also their beloved social enterprises, a cafe. I just got a cup of coffee from their cafe, as well as a bank partner as well. And it's just really phenomenal that you were able to provide this really as a pillar in the community. And I wondered, Brenda, if you could talk a little bit about how did you finance all of this? It is very impressive.
Thank you so much. Lots of duct tape, I'll say, but actually we had a lot of amazing will from community and from our banking partners and really from private philanthropy. When I look at our capital stack, Sung, it looks as if, about 22% of our support came from the city of Chicago. We were fortunate to go through the process for new market tax credits, which represents about 14% of our total. And then private philanthropy came in at about $7 million. And then, of course, we had lots of wonderful individuals that contributed to our campaign for a total of just a little over $11.5 million.
Amazing. That's really amazing that you were able to piece it together. How long did it take you to pull together?
About 2.5 years at most. And I understand that's faster than normal.
Yes, that really that really is. But I know that time is of the essence. North Lawndale Employment Network has always done such amazing work in the community and has been a financial opportunity center since 2005, one of our very first in the country. LISC now operates over 130 of these financial opportunity centers. Actually, rather, we support a network that's operated by amazing and resourceful community-based organizations like yours, from whom we learn. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how the social enterprises connect with your financial opportunity centers.
Well, I think one of the most important lessons that we've learned is that when people need a job, it means that they also need to better understand how to manage even that entry-level wage that they're going to start off with.
Sure.
So how do we help you become competitive for securing work, but then also how do we help you manage the money that you are making? And then what are some of the challenges that you may be facing? It could be that there are bankruptcies in the past. It could be that you have never traditionally used banking, or you don't think you have the ability to even have a savings account. So for us, we've had to integrate our financial education services and financial coaching with employment, and that they really go very much hand in hand. So in the case of Darren, it was really clear that when he went through and worked with Sweet Beginnings, that he was immediately assigned a financial education coach, someone to sit with him and say, where are your dreams? What are your financial hopes? And it's amazing that he's actually found a way not only to save money for his home, but he, as mentioned, is a donor. He actually supports us, and that can't happen. And people wouldn't think that's possible, right? On a regular entry-level wage, but he's beyond a little entry level, but he's able to manage his funds, have a bank account, and actually purchase a home. And so that's why it's important for us to have those services integrated.
That's amazing. And actually, I didn't kind of prep for this, but I'm curious to know, Brenda, roughly how many people are you training every year and providing jobs to through your social enterprises?
So the big number for us now is that we've had roughly about 550, probably 558, 60 people that we have hired since the inception of our social enterprise. Roughly, we're still at about 20 to 40 people a year. Of course, with COVID, we saw a number, we had to shut down for a little bit. We've been impacted by that. So that does affect our numbers, but we're really excited because this new campus and we have a brand new facility for Sweet Beginnings. And so we actually have more time and more ability to scale.
Amazing. That's really amazing. Over 500 people who then have had the opportunity to build wealth, to buy homes in their communities, to give back to their communities.
That's right.
That is so meaningful. And I'm wondering, are you able to share, is your social enterprise, is it self-sustaining? How do you piece together grant support, loan support to make it work on a day-to-day basis?
So because Sweet Beginnings was established long before there was even this thing called social enterprises, right? We didn't have sort of the benefit of some of the new models that exist today. But the model that we have is that Sweet Beginnings is a wholly owned subsidiary of the North Lawndale Employment Network. And so that means that we're also treated, Sweet Beginnings is treated as a disregarded tax entity. Because as long as Sweet Beginnings is advancing the mission and the purpose of the nonprofit, which is, jobs and training, then we are seen as that disregarded tax entity. So that means that NLEN can secure grants that we then pass through to support Sweet Beginnings. So we're able to receive grant funding, but we're also able to generate revenue through the sale of our products.
Wonderful, wonderful, truly amazing. And I wonder if you could provide any advice for those seeking to improve employment prospects for folks, who are maybe reentering citizens or facing some barriers to entry. I think that was, what this really important conversation today was about. I don't know anyone else who's been doing it longer than you, Brenda. I don't know anyone else who's been such a pioneer, particularly in the social enterprise space. So I wonder if you could share some words of wisdom and advice for myself and for the audience here.
Thank you. Certainly there are some amazing people that the panel that was just prior was amazing. Those were some really, really impactful servant leaders. So they had a lot of wisdom to share on stage. I think that for those, especially coming out of incarceration and re-entering society, that so much of what we find that we need to do is to help restore a person's self-worth. Everything that, incarceration represents it's about, stripping a person of their identity and you become a number rather than helping people rediscover their self-worth and who they are, and helping them understand that sometimes the skills that they used for criminal activity are skills that can be transformed and transitioned into wonderful assets in legal work. And I think that that's one of the most important things that we've learned is to look at a person for all of the possibilities. And if we can wrap our arms around them and infuse them with the skills and talent and tools that they need, then they can become productive citizens in society. But it's really about meeting them where they are, honoring who they are, and know that they're incredibly vulnerable, but that we can surround them and help them rediscover their strengths and their assets. And they'll be one of the best employees you can ever have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is amazing. And you actually brought up a point that I just want to underscore again, and that's this concept of transferable skills. Folks are coming in and they're, working with the bees and making amazing honey products, but at the same time, they're learning how to work in food distribution.
Absolutely.
They might be working at the cafe and they're learning customer service skills, which then could be transferred even into the healthcare medical assisting field. There's so many opportunities for transferable skills.
And
if-
certifications are important. I think that's what one of the
That's
things
where
to bring
it's
up.
heading into.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'd love to know actually if you could talk a little bit about where some of your trainees and social enterprise employees, where they've ended up, because North Lawndale is also an amazing Bridges partner. You focus on career pathways and really solid opportunities in in-demand job sectors. And so I wonder if you could speak to that.
Many of our folks, we love to be able to transition them into the transportation, distribution, and logistics sector. It's a really wonderful sector for folks who it's just a little bit more flexible depending on your background. But also we make sure that folks leave with a food handling and food sanitation license. That's built into our curriculum now, so that you're going to leave with at least a credential that can make you more marketable in the labor market. But we also are trying to really be human and individual centered and help people develop pathways for where their passion lies. Because when you do work that you like, that you care about, the likelihood of you retaining that job and not turning over is markedly improved.
That's right. That's absolutely right. I wondered, Brenda, if you had any additional thoughts for the audience today, some closing thoughts, other words of wisdom that you want to share.
Oh my goodness, where do we start? Well, I think, first of all, I love that this conversation is happening, and that the power of social enterprises, businesses that have a clear social purpose for addressing those who are most vulnerable, who have more significant barriers to employment in particular, that they're available, they serve a purpose. And I think one of the struggles is that we don't fit neatly into this box of profitability. I think that that's something that everyone wonders, well, how profitable are you? And the conversation around scaling I thought was really interesting prior. I think it's important that they're profitable, but I also think we have to remember that it's a triple bottom line business. And sometimes we have seasonality of profitability, and sometimes we're not as profitable. But at the end of the day, have we had impact on improving the quality of life for men and women who need opportunities, who are second chance folks, to improve the quality of their lives through work? And so that ultimately becomes a key metric for us. But rest assured, my board is making sure that that bottom line is healthy, as healthy as possible.
I'm sure that is the case. We're coming about to the end of the conversation here. And I just want to, again, thank you for the time and all the insights that you shared. And it's in part through the partnership with North Lawndale and some of our other community-based organizations around the nation that LISC really has been able to, and our financial opportunity centers have had, I think, what you've mentioned earlier, which is just a right frame of mind as we approach business and services and capital deployment and investment in our communities. We very much believe that all individuals are creative, resourceful, and whole. And we also want to acknowledge that there really are racist policies and practices that have limited economic opportunity, in particular in our Black and Brown communities. And, that really has led to a severe racial wealth gap and also a racial health gap as well. And it's so important that organizations like yours really are doing something about it. I think it was earlier in the conversation, I believe it was with Chet, who had talked about just the amazing talent that exists in our communities. I think you're proving that through your, very profitable and amazing social enterprises that you're, leading up. And we're proving that every day in the work that we do, skilling up and training talent to get them to, really be able to meet the needs of employers today.
That's right.
So, I just want to.
I know we're getting down.
Yeah.
I just want to say that this is really about community and economic development, and that social enterprises really do serve such a key role. We have created a space in a neighborhood where where the average income is $24,000 a year. where people have a coffee shop and they can come and have an amazing experience. We're hiring local Black and brown entrepreneurs to provide food and to create art in our communities. We're hiring janitors and landscapers. I mean, really becoming a local economic engine. And I think that's and our social enterprises are a really important part of that. They serve at the core of it, but it's ultimately just a rich opportunity to be an economic driver in neighborhoods that oftentimes get overlooked and are under-resourced.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you so
Thank you
much,
so much,
Brenda,
Sarah.
for sharing your wisdom with all of us today. And thanks again to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York for hosting this conversation. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to our hosts.
That was phenomenal. I have a little bit of FOMO, y'all, because I'm from Chicago and a big fan of Brenda's and Sung, so it was wonderful to see them on the big screen. And I love that they brought the conversation all the way back home, right? They did a very deep dive on one fierce employment social enterprise in Chicago and connected it back up to Chet's opening remarks about the connection between resolution of poverty and unemployment and the social determinants of health. And I'll let you in on a little secret as we go into our outro, and that is that we want this wonky but kind of wonderful term of employment social enterprise to be in the zeitgeist. We want it to be out there, kind of in the household vernacular, so that people that are in that 10 million Americans who are boxed out of today's economy, they can see that there are businesses that were made just for them to re-enter, to reattach, right? So that they can be a part of an economy that works for everyone. But again, with a number that's that big, even if our ESCs proliferate and succeed and do all the good things, they can only reach so many. And so we need public, private, purpose sector working all together to help address the divide. So if you felt a little stir in your belly by anything that anybody shared with you today, I want you to live in alignment with that stir. If you're a financial institution, what can you unlock in terms of creative sources of capital for entrepreneurs seeking to scale? If you're an employer, I want you to look around in your community and see which employment social enterprises are out there that you can work with to create talent pipelines for your workforce. And if you're a consumer, and I know we all are, I want you to buy social, employment social. Go get a brownie, buy a piece of jewelry, contract a service. Any of these transactions ultimately lead to a transformation for people that we care about the most. Whatever you do, listen to the fire that's ignited in you. And it's a great segue to our outro, which is a little bit of a trailer from a mini documentary we're working on that features entrepreneurs and people working in these enterprises on whose shoulders we stand. So let's check that out, and then right after it's over, we can hang out and have some time together in community in our cocktail reception. Thanks so much for being here today. We truly could not do this work without you. Thank you.
When I went to prison, I remember being down and out. 6x9 cell, all hopes and dreams, all that was gone. My whole life is over. It's just over.
What is it like if we're not known for the biggest mistake we ever made, but instead known for the biggest gift that we had?
There was a way that I could give back to the community. REDF was the catalyst to help me transition my life and my experience.
This can get you wherever you want to go.
This shit will change your life.
I just felt like I had the world against me, but with them there, it just helped me get my foot on the steps.
They know what it feels like when a new beginning gets created, when your family sees the change in you, your community sees the change in you.
REDF put a fire under us that, ironically, we just can't put out.
Often in tragedy, we see the very best in the human spirit. And I am going to tell their story.
I had lost everything. Jalen saved my life. I just had something a little bit more precious to live for.
formerly incarcerated people, they do deserve the opportunity to transition into this work.
We're not leaving nobody here left behind.
Wow. I have to come after that. But, okay. First, a few thank yous are in order. I want to thank the REDF team, the New York Fed team, all of our panelists, all of you for joining us here today. You know, it's raining outside, so I'm glad we can all stay and wait out the rain a little bit with a nice reception outside in the lobby here. You know, I think there are a lot of messages that we heard today, and I think one that I want everyone to take away is that the Fed is open. We're open to convene, to bring these conversations together, to activate this building, use this building to have these types of conversations, bring different stakeholders to the table that typically don't speak to each other. We want to drive capital toward innovative ideas and approaches, and we really want to figure out how we can activate the Fed, you know, figure out, you know, what's working, what's not working, and try to devote resources toward those ends. And so thank you for joining us, and this has been a really great conference. Thank you.